Chapter 233. South of the encampment, the captive camp. When there was war, there would be casualties and captives. The Grey Coat Army had been fighting with the legions for quite some time, especially in the recent battle at the tunnel. The Grey Coat Army had suffered heavy losses, but the legions had also left behind many injured and captive soldiers. Both sides had already exchanged captives once, but the Grey Coat Army had far fewer captives than the other side. Naturally, these extra captives could not be killed. They would be exchanged for items of equivalent value according to their ranks. In the end, the most important thing in war was the outcome of victory and the rewards that would be obtained, not the military success. For ordinary people, it was naturally a good thing to be able to live. However, for warriors on the battlefield, they would rather die than bear the title of captive. Therefore, when there was a chance to escape, even if it was a slim chance of survival, many people would be willing to take the risk. Just as the silver-haired man and the others were doing their best to hold back Zwafan, the group of black-armored men who were protecting the noble youth paid a heavy price and finally charged into the captive camp. Then, the guard of the captive camp were defeated and the gate was wide open. Almost all the captives who could move ran out and fought with the Grey Coat Army barehanded. Without a doubt, this brought a lot of trouble to the Grey Coat Army. After the group of black-armored men opened the captive camp, they did not stop and rush to a tent at the side. At this moment, an anxious shout was heard. "Stop them! There's a magic teleportation formation there." Teleportation formation? Everyone's hands paused as they turned to look towards the east. Leader Losha, Old General Omen, Minister Bosco, almost all the higher-ups of the Grey Coat Army were here. The shout just now came from Josiah, who was beside Losha. Josiah, who had sensed magical waves a few times, was finally sure that there was a teleportation formation inside. This also explained why the black-armored men suddenly appeared in the encampment. At this moment, Losha's expression was solemn. He waved his hand and pointed to the tent. "Everyone, listen to my orders. Destroy that place at all costs." A magic formation was an intricate and mysterious thing. It was not easy to build one. At the very least, they needed a great magician who was proficient in formations. Everyone, including Rosa, could not figure out when a magic circle was built right under their noses. However, it was obviously not the time to think about that. Just as most delicate objects were fragile, magic arrays were also fragile objects. Even if any of the lines were to be destroyed, it would be useless. All the Grey Coat Army soldiers heard Losha's order and immediately rushed to the tent. At this time, Old General Omeng also sent in a group of high-ranking officers behind him to form an assault team. Most of these people had fighting chi, so they could be considered as fresh troops. Suddenly, dozens of black-armored men emerged from the tent that was supposed to be a house. They quickly formed a circle and formed a defensive line. The battle reached its climax in an instant. The Grey Coat Army soldiers fought against the black armor men, surrounding the noble youth while attacking the tent with all their might. Everyone understood that these noble youths could not leave. Otherwise, they would continue to be attacked by the Legion soldiers outside until they were completely wiped out. As for the black-armored men, they had to save people. If the teleportation formation was destroyed, even they would be trapped here. The Grey Coat Army had tens of thousands of people. If they were trapped here, they would either be captured or lose their lives. There was no other way out. It was either you die or I die. Both sides were in a killing frenzy. Chi. Suddenly, a golden sword radiance was emitted from the fighting Chi circle and struck the tent. It was Zwafan. He was actually able to free himself to attack while being surrounded by 3 Earth-rank warriors. This sword radiance was extremely domineering. A few of the black-armored men tried to block it, but were immediately crushed into pieces. "Good. Break!" The Grey Coat Army soldiers cheered. They could almost see the magic formation crumbling under the sword radiance. Eunice. With a long roar, the tent rippled and a graceful figure walked out. It was Eunice, who had the speed of a ghost. Pooh! Eunice spat out a mouthful of blood as soon as she came out. Clearly, this speed that was close to teleportation caused her to pay a price. Without wiping the blood from her mouth, Eunice let out a shrill cry, and raised her daggers in the shape of a cross. Netherworld dark mist, come out. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Wisps of black smoke suddenly appeared out of thin air and quickly formed a thick layer of clouds, like a shield. Boom! Fighting chi overflowed, and the air shook. The surrounding black-armored men and gray-coat army soldiers involuntarily went limp and fell to the ground. The illusory smoke seemed to have substance and blocked the golden sword radiance's attack. However, Eunice, whose arms were trembling, had clearly reached her limit. Her strength was not in defense. This kind of attack really made things difficult for her. But there was no other way. In that situation, only she could have rushed over quickly. My clothes. With another shrill cry and some inexplicable words, there was also the sound of bones breaking. Eunice fell like a cannonball and smashed into the tent. She could not hold on any longer, but this block was not useless. The netherworld dark mist finally moved the golden sword radiance a little. Boom! The sword radiance brushed past the tent and chopped down, causing waves of air to roll. Some of the black-armored men nearby could be considered to have suffered. They could not resist in time and were instantly sent flying by the fighting chi. At the same time, the tent was also destroyed by the fighting chi and turned into rags. At this time, a light purple round cover appeared in everyone's line of sight. Ripples appeared on it because of the fighting chi. Below the round cover was a sparkling pentagram. In the middle, there was a very mysterious pattern that even a layman would find mysterious. These crisscrossing lines were like transistors. Inside, there was a bright purple moving light. From afar, it looked like a liquid was constantly flowing inside. This array was the magic teleportation array. As for the light purple round cover outside, it was not a large magic shield. Its defensive power was ordinary. Its purpose was to protect the person teleporting and to prevent the array from being destroyed by wild beasts. Kill. The soldiers quickly recovered from a novelty of seeing the magic array for the first time. They waved their swords and charged forward even more ferociously. At this time, in the distance, boom, 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 continuous explosions sounded, and the fighting chi continued to bloom and shatter. Bang, bang. Two figures rolled out of the fighting chi in a sorry state. It was the silver-haired man and Oliver. At this time, the two of them looked really miserable. Their bodies were full of their own bloodstains. Originally, the three of them were having a hard time besieging Zwafan. Now that Eunice had left, their fighting energy was quickly defeated. "Eunice!" Ollie roared. "What are you shouting for?" A figure flashed from the side. It was Eunice, whose beautiful face was gloomy. Her left arm was hanging limply by her side. It was obviously broken. However, when she came out, her face was full of anger as she pointed at her broken black armor and shouted at Zwafan. "Damn it. So what if you are strong? Do you know you ruined my beautiful clothes?" Zwafan, who had an indifferent expression, froze for a moment. His face actually showed some embarrassment for the first time. His mouth moved as if he wanted to apologize, but in the end, he did not say anything. Oliver, who was next to him, opened his mouth. His face was full of disbelief. The silver-haired man also covered his forehead. He looked like he could not bear to look. "Damn it. Still not apologizing? Do you think you can do whatever you want just because you are handsome? Did you not learn manners?" The more Eunice spoke, the more agitated she became. In the end, if the silver-haired man had not held her back, she would have rushed forward to argue. The scene also fell into a strange silence because of her sudden outburst. Losha, who was watching from afar, had a rather interesting expression. The corner of his mouth twitched a few times. He muttered in a low voice, "Zwafan, you are a solid piece of wood." Hua! The awkward situation was instantly broken by commotion. A group of black-armored men ran over with panicked expressions. Good timing. The silver-haired man was delighted. He was about to call for help from the people outside, but unexpectedly, it was him who came. They were waiting for orders. "Retreat, retreat." The leader of the black-armored men kept shouting. "Damn it, who said we should retreat?" The silver-haired man roared with an ugly expression. Because of his strength, he was the highest leader of this operation. "Leader Yama, Goshawk is dead. What? Goshawk is dead. The silver-haired man called Yemaw, Oliver, and Eunice all cried out in shock. From the previous situation, the three of them knew that Goshawk might have been entangled. However, they never thought that Goshawk would actually be dead. Yes, Sir Goshawk has died in battle. The corpse is behind. The black-armored man pointed behind. At this moment, a series of heavy footsteps sounded. Then a black mass of soldiers pressed forward. The leader of the group carried the corpse of the black-armored man on his back. His expression was calm. Goshawk. Yemaw and the others were the most familiar with Goshawk. They immediately recognized that the corpse was their teammate, Goshawk. I want you dead. Oliver immediately went berserk. He took large strides and was about to rush over. You're all fleeting clouds. Why aren't you retreating? The soldier at the front was obviously in character. Facing the aggressive Oliver, he only gave him a disdainful glance. Slap! The furious Oliver was pulled back by Yemaw's shoulder. Leader. Yemaw shook his head gently and looked at Eunice. The latter nodded. Whoosh! Her figure instantly disappeared. Strange. Why aren't these people retreating? The soldier looked at the black-armored men and was puzzled. Do I have to fight? Hiss! Suddenly, a black mist rose and a pitch-black dagger slashed at the soldier's throat. It was Eunice who was rushing over. She didn't dare to be careless and used the dark nether mist the moment she attacked. The soldier looked at the dagger in front of him and his mind went blank. What was going on? Clang! A blood-red dagger poked out from behind the soldier's shoulder and clashed with the pitch-black dagger. Bang! The soldier's figure was pulled back, and he fell to the back. Clang! 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 The sound of rain hitting a banana leaf was dense. Two figures, almost invisible to the naked eye, were entangled in the black mist. Attack! Defense! Retreat! Whoosh! Whoosh! In a second, the two figures separated. So it's you? Eunice, who was holding Goshawk's body, said word by word with a dangerous glint in her eyes. This sentence sounded very sudden and inexplicable. Perhaps this was a woman's intuition. Eunice was sure that the charcoal in front of her was Goshawk's murderer at a glance. As for the charcoal, it was of course Tang Yin. At this moment, he was silent and his eyes were fixed on Eunice's dagger. Although it was only a brief exchange, he was very sure that this was a ruthless character who was not weaker than Goshawk. Pay for Goshawk's life. Eunice's eyes flashed and she waved the dagger. Eunice. Yemaw suddenly shouted from afar. Let's go. We've lost this time. After saying that, she simply turned and ran towards the teleportation portal. Oliver roared, unwilling to give up, and ran away. Oh, I'll remember you. Eunice stared at Tang Yin and suddenly smiled charmingly. If it were not for the special circumstances, it was very likely that people would think that this was the words of a lover who was reluctant to part. Of course, Tang Yin did not think so. He could clearly feel the cold, murderous intent under the other party's bright smile. He touched his nose. Goshawk said the same thing before. Eunice narrowed her crescent-shaped eyes and smiled even more. I can now confirm that I'll remember you for the rest of my life. Another one who's going to follow me for the rest of my life. Tang Yin spread his hands and said helplessly, Actually, I'm not that good. Eunice blinked. For the first time, she looked a little conflicted. Just you wait. After saying this, Eunice's figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. Tang Yin's shoulders slumped in an instant. A trace of blood dripped from his palm. He curled his lips nonchalantly and said, Wait my ass. I don't believe that you'll be able to recognize me next time. If you like this work, you're welcome to come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 234. Thank you to my book friend Moonlight Dota for the tip. Also, Raccoon is shamelessly asking for a recommendation vote. Yes, as the saying goes, one has to be honest. You have to vote when you read. You must have enjoyed reading today's update. Then, although the order to retreat had been issued, the Grey Coat Army's encampment wasn't a city gate. How could anyone come and go as they pleased? Zwafan immediately attacked with his golden blade. However, Yemaw and the others didn't have the intention to fight to the death. They retreated to the teleportation portal while fighting. Goshawk's death was a huge blow to Oliver and the other two. The Dusk Hunter group had already lost 2 teammates in this mission. If the black armored man who played with exploding crystals had died, Night Demon could still calm himself down and say that it was a pity. However, after seeing Goshawk's corpse, Yimal lost his composure and couldn't say anything. The Dusk Hunter group's reputation in the circle was built by the 5 teammates. They had accepted more dangerous missions in the past, but who would have thought that they would fall at the hands of the Grey Coat Army? Eunice didn't say that she would remember Tang Yin. She didn't just say it casually. It was what the rest of them thought. Yimal clenched his fists. No one would be able to survive after killing the members of the Dusk Hunter group. Of course, it was still too early to think about this. What they needed to do now was to escape. Yimal quickly observed the situation. The soldiers of the Grey Cloth Army had the absolute advantage. Although the black armored soldiers had received the order to retreat, they did not understand the deeper meaning of the order. They still wanted to escort the group of noble youths out of the battlefield. Of course, there were some black armored men who decided to give up on the mission reward and stepped onto the teleportation portal. Yimal pursed his lips and said decisively, "Eunice, Oliver, you guys go first." "Yes, Captain." The two of them didn't hesitate and turned to leave Zhuofan's attack range. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't have any loyalty. It was a tacit understanding and trust. They believed that their captain would be able to escape successfully, even if the opponent was a warrior who was half a step into the Void Realm. Zhuofan naturally wouldn't let the two of them leave. Now that the situation was good, he wanted to keep the 3 most threatening people here. His figure suddenly soared into the air, and the golden sword slashed down. Chi! Chi! 2 golden swords appeared in an instant, slashing towards Oliver and Eunice, who had already escaped from the battle. At this moment, Silver Dragon Dance opened. The silver light around Yimal's body surged violently. If Zhuofan's previous eruption was like a small sun, then he was now like a waning moon. Both of his hands instantly made complicated gestures, bringing about bursts of afterimages. Finally, he suddenly opened them. Huff, huff, huff. Numerous silver whips curled in the air, scattered, gathered, and coiled around each other. He clasped his hands together and pushed them out in a conical shape. Roar! A furious dragon's roar was heard. The intertwined whips seemed to form a giant silver dragon. They circled a little and opened their mouth to devour. Then, they soared up to meet the golden sword light. What the F***CK? Tang Yin couldn't help but curse. He roared, "Get down." After saying that, he didn't care about anything else. He first covered his ears and fell down. The soldiers behind him who reacted quickly also fell down instantly. As for those who reacted slowly, they were thrown to the ground by the shockwave later on. Boom, boom, boom. Explode, explode, explode. The moment the 2 golden swords collided with the giant silver dragon, the sky and earth darkened. The flames that soared into the sky were almost instantly suppressed by the surging shockwave. The people below were even more unbearable. There was a buzzing sound in their heads, as if there was a sudden clap of thunder. It was piercing pain. Puff! Yimal opened his mouth and spat out a large mouthful of blood. His body seemed to have been hit by a galloping bull. He arched his body and retreated dozens of meters, leaving 2 deep drag marks under his feet. Ha ha huff. I know, I finally know. Ha ha, a Void Realm warrior. So that's how it is. Ha ha. Although he suffered such injuries, Yimal wasn't shocked. Instead, he laughed, his voice shaking the sky. He couldn't help but be happy. Yimal's strength had been stuck at the peak of Earth Realm for a long time, but he hadn't found the opportunity to improve. But in that exchange, just now, he had touched the doorway to Void Stage. Although he only felt a little, there was still a long way to go before he could fully step into it. But now that he knew where the door was, would he still be afraid of going astray? Would he still be afraid of not being able to reach it? In the air, Zhuofan's body swayed a few times. He remained silent and swung his golden sword down. Ha, too late. Yimal laughed loudly. He opened his hands as if throwing something out. Ah, God, save me. A series of exclamations rang out and a dozen figures dressed in luxurious clothes flew out from the crowd, waving their hands and legs. If someone had sharp eyes, they would have seen a long transparent thread at their waists. For you, huff, 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 dozens of figures whizzed into the sky and welcomed the golden sword light that had just been released. Zwafan's indifferent expression changed. He rushed down and swung his golden sword light again, catching up with the previous attack. Boom, gone. Gone. Today, I was lucky to have received your teachings. I will repay you double in the future. Yema bowed to Zwafan in the air. He turned around and glanced behind him. He instantly went to the teleportation portal and disappeared in a flash. TSK, TSK, just leave. Why did you look at me? Tang In rubbed his nose in the distance with a helpless expression. In the air, Zwafan raised his hands and slowly descended. Above his head, there were dozens of noble youths floating in the air. They had all fainted because of the collision between the two golden sword lights. Yama could be said to be a ruthless character. After deciding to retreat, he thought of using these unlucky noble youths as shields. Not to mention his sharp mind, his decisiveness in giving up made him much stronger than the other black-armored men. Retreat! Retreat! Damn it! The Dust Hunter group is too unkind. The remaining black-armored men were a little stunned when they saw Yema and the others act like this. After regaining their senses, they no longer cared about escorting the noble youths. They all rushed towards the teleportation portal like a swarm of bees. Without the protection of these people, the remaining noble youths naturally could not do anything. They were all quickly captured. At this point, Losha and the others in the distance heaved a sigh of relief. They had finally escaped this disaster. Now, the only chaos left was the black-armored men who did not manage to retreat in time and the Legion soldiers who escaped from the captive camp. At this time, Losha waved his hand decisively. Keep them. The chaos tonight could be said to be caused by these black-armored men. How could they let them go now? The soldiers swarmed in again. However, these black-armored men did not have any intention to fight. Now, they only had eyes for the faint purple teleportation portal. Quick, run. We have suffered a great loss this time. Run. These black-armored men were still strong. After getting rid of them quickly, they all gathered at one point. Tang In sneered at them from afar. He was counting silently in his heart. 10, 9, 8, 7. Suddenly hum. Suddenly, the magic circle let out a soft hum. The mysterious pattern suddenly bloomed with a purple light. The black-armored men who ran here could not help but scream and cover their eyes. Then, the light dimmed instantly, and the purple circle disappeared. Only a little light was left. As the last light disappeared, the teleportation portal fell into a dead silence. The black-armored men looked at each other. There was a mixture of anger and sadness in their hearts. Naturally, they knew what this meant. Some of the black-armored men did not believe in heresy and jumped onto the magic circle. However, no matter how they stomped and slapped the ground, the magic circle did not have any reaction. Dusk Hunter Group, F*CK, all your ancestors. I curse you to die a horrible death. After you die, your souls will fall into a bottomless abyss and be tortured by magma at all times, idioms, dialects, rural slang, etc. All kinds of insults could be heard. If the members of the Dusk Hunter Group were to appear here, these black-armored men would definitely skin them alive. Vicious enough, ruthless enough, thorough enough. Tang In smacked his lips and let out a long sigh. The reason the Dusk Hunter Group did this was because they were worried that Zwafan would kill his way through the teleportation portal. Of course, even if Zwafan really went there, he might not be able to find them. After all, there was a time difference. However, the other party still chose to completely eliminate this threat. This kind of cold personality was truly terrifying. Tang In thought about Eunice's warning and the last glance Yama gave him. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. Being targeted by such a person, anyone would not be able to eat or sleep in peace. We don't want to fight anymore. We surrender. I can tell you the location of the Dusk Hunter Group. Oh, The few people who ran away just now, yes, yes. I also know that this teleportation portal is a short distance. They're just a few kilometers away. I have a lot of money. As long as you let me go, it's all yours. When the black armored men saw the gray coat army soldiers pressing forward, they immediately threw away their weapons. Then they shouted all kinds of reasons, hoping to get their lives back. Compared to them, the army soldiers who came out of the captive camp were very unyielding. They continued to fight in small groups. In terms of strength, these black armored men were undoubtedly superior. However, in terms of fighting spirit, these army soldiers were miles ahead of their opponents. However, the overall situation was like this. The army soldiers were unable to hold on for long before they were beaten to the ground and captured again. About half an hour later, the chaotic encampment of the gray cloth army finally regained its calm. However, the mess on the ground was no longer as warm and peaceful as it was before. The civilians and soldiers who were lying in pools of blood could no longer stand up. The soldiers who were rushing back and forth were doing post-war work. Some were patrolling to catch the fish that had escaped the net. Some were carrying the corpses, and some were carrying buckets to put out the flames everywhere. In the darkness, there were faint, trembling voices calling for their loved ones. There were uncontrollable cries, and children asking where their loved ones were. Tang and did not know how he had walked all the way here. He only knew that after walking back to the tent, he saw little Carol and hugged her in his arms. I swear, I will definitely teach you the most powerful ability. Okay, the most powerful ability. No one can beat it. Okay, got it, Big Brother Tang. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 235. In the end, it was more realistic to have one's own fate in one's own hands. Tang and had always disagreed with little Carol learning martial arts because he knew that once she embarked on this path, it was impossible to turn back. But now, seeing the miserable and innocent civilian soldiers all over the ground, he completely changed his mind. Disaster wouldn't let them go just because they were weak and powerless. Only by facing them head-on and slashing forward could they win back their own chance of survival. She took out the wound medicine, wound cloth, a basin of water, and treated the wound. Little Carol took a wet cloth and wiped the filth on Tangen's back. The wound she cleaned was horrifying. Dark red cracks crisscrossed all over his body, like a ceramic jar that would shatter if it fell to the ground. Little Carol's hand was trembling. Her movements were very gentle. Tears welled up in her eyes and finally slid down her face silently. I'll do it myself, Tang Yin said as he moved his body, somewhat unaccustomed to it. The wound was painful, but he now felt a little itchy, as if a furry cat's paw was slowly touching him. Little Carol shook her head stubbornly. Then, she remembered that Tang Yin couldn't see, so she said, Carol can do it. Okay. Tang Yin nodded and poured the medicine on his hand. Then, he covered the wound that had been cleaned. His body suddenly trembled. The medicine supplied by the Gray Coat Army was naturally not that high grade. When it landed on the wound, it was like applying a layer of chilly water. It would take some time for a cool feeling to spread. Other than the arrow that pierced through his left shoulder, almost all of the injuries on his body were caused by the shock wave of the explosion. This kind of injury looked terrifying, but as long as the body didn't shatter, it would slowly recover. Tang didn't doubt his body's recovery ability. For example, some of the old injuries from the past couldn't even be seen now, and the places that grew back were actually becoming whiter and whiter. After all, he had been on the battlefield. Why was he becoming more and more like a gigolo now? Tang Yin stroked his chin, somewhat distressed. Little Carol cleaned herself very carefully. After about half an hour, she finished wiping herself. Then, she applied the medicine and wrapped her body firmly with a white cloth. The post-war work outside was still ongoing. Dinner was sent directly to the front of the tent by the logistics staff. However, before Tang Yin and the others could start eating, another voice came from outside the tent. Done, are you there? Josiah, Tang Yin said in surprise. I'm here. The curtains aren't drawn. Come in. The curtain was lifted, and Josiah slowly walked in. He raised his head, and his eyes were red. He said in a sorrowful tone, "Tang, Aunt Megan is dead." Tang In was stunned. He immediately recalled that Aunt Megan was the kind lady in charge of logistics when he first joined Aaron's Gray Coat Army. At that time, Josiah didn't know anything. He followed behind her and learned how to do things. Their relationship had always been very good. "I'm very sorry. It's all my fault." Josiah lowered his head. Under his golden brown hair, only his lips could be seen. "I clearly sensed the magic waves before. Why didn't I think of the teleportation array? If I thought of it, everyone wouldn't have died. Aunt Megan wouldn't have." At that moment, Josiah's tone became more and more hurried. His expression also became more and more agitated. "Josiah." Tang In suddenly interrupted Josiah's self-pity. He then shook his head. "Don't think too much. You're not a god. You're just an intermediate mage. You were able to recognize the teleportation array and point out the main direction for the soldiers. In fact, you've already done your best." This was the truth. Everyone, including Tang In and Zui Fan, only had a rough idea of the direction in which the black armored soldiers had retreated. They didn't know that there was a teleportation array there. If not for Josiah's words, this chaos would have lasted for at least an hour. At that time, it would be hard to say how many people would have escaped. After a long time, Josiah nodded. She was also agitated by the death of Megan and everyone else. Now that she was awakened by Tang In's shout, she finally regained some of her rationality. When Tang In saw this, he changed the topic. "You were with Leader Losha just now, right? How are you going to deal with the black armored soldiers? Those are dirty bounty hunters." Josiah bluntly scolded. "Bounty hunters? What's that?" Tang In asked in surprise. This was the first time he had heard of this title. Josiah opened his mouth and looked at Tang in confusion. "You don't know? But you're an assassin. Does this have anything to do with anything?" Tang In rubbed his nose and thought, "I'm a newbie." Josiah saw that Tang In didn't seem to know, so he explained in detail. Tang In finally understood what kind of profession the bounty hunter was. The bounty hunter profession was similar to mercenaries. First, they were also organized. The name was the Bounty Hunter Guild. This sounded no different from a thief guild or mercenary guild. Secondly, the process of both sides was very similar. The guild would issue missions, and the members would be responsible for completing them. Then there was a question. Since the process was almost the same, was there a need for the Bounty Hunter Guild to exist? The answer was, of course, there was. The warriors of another world respected strength. The weak were prey to the strong. Fighting people, fighting beasts, and so on. The fighting habits had long been integrated into their blood. Strong people violated the rules with their strength. It was undoubtedly difficult to manage this group of people. Forcefully suppressing them was even more impossible. Therefore, some official thief guilds, mercenary guilds, and so on had appeared. Their appearance was a very good guide. There were many missions on this platform every day, and martial artists only needed to join in to earn money with their own abilities. To a large extent, this put an end to the similar situation where martial artists were embarrassed and took risks out of desperation. However, the officials were the officials after all. Therefore, the missions in the Thief Guild were difficult because they couldn't say that they supported stealing and killing. After some consideration, the officials finally made a compromise. They could issue missions for stealing and hiring assassins, but the information must be public. In other words, after an assassin accepted a mission, it was very likely that the target of his assassination would know that he was in danger recently. With precautions, the possibility of being assassinated would naturally be much smaller. In addition, the brand officials almost had a law for the assassins they caught: one-day trip to the gallows. Therefore, the number of assassins was limited in the end. Of course, for assassins, this was undoubtedly a policy that they hated. But the key was that they couldn't resist because no one would support an assassin later on. A guild called the Bounty Hunter Guild appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't an official guild. It was privately established by a mysterious force. In the beginning, there was only one kind of mission in this guild, which was assassination. Unlike the Thief Guild, they were absolutely confidential about the employer, bounty hunter, and mission information. This characteristic attracted a large number of assassins to become bounty hunters. As the guild continued to grow, the missions began to expand. In addition to assassination, there were also treasure hunting, kidnapping, and so on. Just like the guild slogan, as long as you could afford it, you could get anything here. Under such an atmosphere, the quality of the bounty hunters could be imagined. In short, bounty hunters are a group of evil people who will do anything for dirty money. Josiah added a resentful evaluation at the end of his words. Understood. Tang In nodded in agreement, but he was a little emotional. This was an assassin's organization. In comparison, the Thief Guild that tied hands and feet was weak. Well, for what you said, this bounty hunter guild doesn't seem to be welcomed by the officials. Tang In quickly grasped the key of these words. Of course, the officials' attitude towards the bounty hunter guild has always been to destroy it directly. Josiah clenched his fist. But they're too good at hiding. I heard that to join, they need someone to recommend them. This way, the officials can't find their address at all. Humph, but they will be destroyed sooner or later. Looking at the indignant Josiah, Tang In couldn't help but touch his nose. Please, in the eyes of the brand officials, the Gray Coat Army's image was not much better than the bounty hunters at this point. Josiah's face suddenly turned red, and he said angrily, Tang, do you know? When I came out from Aunt Rosa's place just now, some people were actually hesitating to execute those dirty bounty hunters. Why? Tang In was shocked. What the bounty hunters did at the Gray Coat Army's base tonight was enough to kill them several times. Isn't it because they are timid? They are afraid of the bounty hunter guild's revenge. Josiah said disdainfully. Revenge? Tang In opened his mouth. The bounty hunter guild had this kind of benefit? Anyway, the thieves guild didn't have it. Yes. Josiah pursed his lips. I heard from them that there was a bounty hunter team that was on their way back from a treasure hunt. They were targeted by a large group of thieves. In the end, the items were stolen and the people were killed. Later, the guild issued a mission and called for the bounty hunters to besiege that group of thieves until they were destroyed. After a pause, Josiah continued, But so what? Our people can't die in vain. Besides, how can we not choose to fight back because we are afraid of the other party's revenge? Isn't that ridiculous? Anyway, I believe that Aunt Rosa will kill them. Tang In nodded silently. This was indeed a problem for Rosa and the others. If they didn't kill them, it would appease the public. If they killed them, they would create a huge enemy out of thin air. Originally, it was normal to be killed while out on a mission. He believed that the bounty hunter guild wouldn't bother with this matter. But now, there were too many people. After those bounty hunters were tricked by Yema and the others, more than 100 of them were captured. This was naturally not a loss for the bounty hunter guild that strictly developed their numbers. Soon, the other party would probably send people to negotiate. This was probably the reason why those bounty hunters surrendered so readily. After thinking about the situation, Tang In narrowed his eyes. Then, Leader Rosa, what will you do? To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 236. From the chaos to the calm. The bounty hunter surprise attack didn't take long, but the damage they caused was huge. From a military point of view, the bounty hunter's attack was perfect except for the fact that they didn't achieve their goal. They were like the special forces in the future. A small force invaded, and a sudden attack left behind a mess. Tang and didn't need to look carefully to know that the Gray Coat Army had lost more than 500 soldiers this time, and there were even more injured. Other than that, the civilians who died were even more sorrowful and indignant. They didn't have the self-defense awareness of soldiers. In the early stage of the explosion, there were many casualties. Tang didn't know what the Gray Coat Army's higher-ups would decide in the end. In terms of personal preference, he was the same as Josiah. Of course, he was in favor of killing these bounty hunters. However, when one reached a certain height and held the fate of countless people in their hands, it was often difficult to make a quick decision. Dusk fell, and the lights in Rosa's hut were lit all night. Facts proved that Tangen's doubts didn't need to last long. The next morning, more than 100 bounty hunters were brought to the open space created by the battle between Zwafan and the others last night. There were already rows of wooden stakes there. At this time, many soldiers and civilians gathered around. "Kill them. Give me back my brother's life. My granddaughter is only 3 years old. Ah, dirty bastards, go to hell, go to hell. Boo-hoo." As these people were brought out, the surrounding gray coat army people were in an uproar. Some shouted at the top of their lungs to avenge their loved ones, and some pleaded for the order to kill them. Under the anger of the crowd, some soil, stones, vegetables, and potatoes were thrown over, like a layer of hailstones. The bounty hunters were now pale and lowered their heads. Their strength was naturally higher than these women, children, and the elderly, but now they didn't dare to look into their eyes. It was as if there were balls of fire burning in the depths of their hearts. Soon, these pitiful bounty hunters passed through the crowd and came to the open space. After seeing the nailed wooden stakes, they seemed to realize something and immediately twisted their tied bodies, constantly struggling to resist. "Damn it, they want to kill us. Motherf asterisk cur. Aren't you afraid of the guild's revenge?" The reason why they surrendered so easily was because they believed that the Gray Coat Army would let them go because of the threat of the guild. They were willing to take out their life savings in exchange for their lives. But who would have thought that just a few hours later, the Gray Coat Army would simply execute them? Most of the bounty hunters had combat aura in their bodies. As they struggled, the soldiers beside them could not hold it in any longer. Some of them had even managed to break free from the control. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. Boom! The people of the Gray Coat Army felt their shoulders sink as an invisible pressure fell on them. If the people around them were like this, the pressure on the bounty hunters was even greater. They felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on them, and the air around them had turned into a viscous liquid, making it difficult to breathe. At the front, Zwafan quietly walked out with his sword in his hand. The pressure of a void-level warrior was not something these bounty hunters could withstand. The accompanying soldiers took advantage of the fact that they were sweating profusely to tie the bounty hunters to the wooden stakes. The crowd parted, and Rosa, who was dressed in black, walked out with heavy steps. Her face was still beautiful, but the traces of blood in her eyes showed that she was tired. In front of the wooden stakes, Rosa turned to face the crowd and bowed deeply. The angry voices gradually faded away, and the scene returned to silence. "I'm sorry, everyone." Rosa pursed her lips, and her face was filled with sorrow. A total of 1,141 companions left us forever last night. Among them are our brothers, our mothers, our grandfathers, and our children. Until now, I've been thinking about a question. Why is it that the poorer we are, the more oppressed we are? The lower we are, the more we are bullied. The weaker we are, the more we are blessed by disaster. I don't understand why the loving God is so cruel to us again and again. But not understanding doesn't mean that we won't continue to persevere. We will always be even more determined to walk this path. Just like how we will never forget our companions who sacrificed themselves for this. The Gray Coat Army is not a mob, but the Gray Coat Army will never tolerate those who cause us pain for no reason. At this point, Rosa pointed at the bounty hunter who was struggling behind her. I'm not a judge, and I'm not God. I have no right to decide a person's life and death, but at least we have the right to fight back. Well, actually, I want to say, a life for a life, since ancient times. So now, everyone can take revenge for any grievances you have, and repay any grievances you have. After saying this, Rosa simply walked to the side. Kill, 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 kill. The shouting went from one person to a whole group, from chaos to order. In the end, it shook the sky and spread several miles away. At this time, an old woman with tears streaming down her face walked out of the crowd step by step. Her turbid eyes swept across the wooden stakes one by one, as if she was looking for something. Finally, she stopped in front of a bounty hunter in the back row. It's you. Little Mary, my granddaughter." Her wriggling lips kept repeating these two words, and her old, dry, bark-like hand took out a rusty knife from her chest pocket. If she was not wrong, it should be used to peel fruits. The bounty hunter's eyes were wide open, and his mouth was wide open. He really could not remember killing a child last night. He only vaguely remembered that a small figure called him uncle last night. But he felt that she was in the way, so he kicked her aside. "I want to see if you have a black heart. How could you do that to a child like little Mary?" Hey, old man, you're mistaken." Ugh. Before he could finish his sentence, the knife had already pierced his chest. The black armor of the bounty hunter was stripped off when he was captured, so the knife was not sharp, but it still pierced through his skin. "You're asking for death." The bounty hunter was furious, and his combat aura shone brightly, and he was about to send the old woman flying. But at this time, a golden veil shrouded him, and his combat aura was instantly dispersed. Puff, puff. Blood spurted out. This was an ordinary old woman. She might have killed a lot of chickens and ducks in her life, but it was certain that she had never killed anyone, and she did not even dare to think about killing anyone. But now, although her knife was still trembling, it was firmly moving towards the surrounding skin, as if she was going to cut a circle. Kill. Seeing the blood, the surrounding citizens of the Gray Coat Army could not help but charge forward, and they surrounded the bounty hunter on the wooden stake and beat him up. If he was a soldier, they would have slashed his neck. But if he was a commoner, their attacks were mixed. Some used wooden sticks, some used rocks, and some used teeth. The bounty hunters were dumbfounded and went crazy. They had never seen such a scene before. Their combat aura was restricted by Zwafan, so they could not use their combat aura armor. They could only watch as their flesh was torn off by the bloody mouths of the bounty hunters' screams of pain, cheers, faces twisted with pain, faces filled with joy and relief from being able to get their revenge. Two completely different emotions, even going to extremes, were displayed in this small, open space. At this time, no matter if it was the bounty hunters or the citizens of the Gray Coat Army, they could not be considered rational. Of course, there was no need for rationality here. What was needed here was either pain or pleasure. Tang Yin, who was standing at the periphery, looked at the hellish scene in front of him and could not help but raise his eyebrows. Of course, he did not have a good impression of the bounty hunters, although it was a little ridiculous from an assassin's point of view. Tang Yin only admired Rose's methods. Looking at the big picture, he believed that many people would think that Rose's actions were a little impulsive, and they would even criticize her for not being a qualified leader. The Gray Coat Army was originally weak, and now they had provoked a strong enemy. It was really unwise. Of course, revenge had to be taken, but it could be done in a less intense way, or it could be done in a more focused way, and then take revenge in the future. But this was what Tang Yin admired. Not all leaders would have the courage to abandon everything else and only have the courage to take revenge. What do you think? Is my way of handling things too cruel and inappropriate? No, it's the opposite. It's too appropriate. Tang Yin smiled and turned his head to Rosa, who was walking to his side. Most people would always think about the big picture, think about the big picture, think about the big picture, but they did not know that it was because of this kind of thinking that they slowly lost the courage to make the final decision. Oh, Rosa raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh, right, you're an assassin, so you probably don't feel anything about this kind of situation." Tang Yin touched his nose and said a little awkwardly, "Assassins are not always this cruel." Huh. Rosa chuckled and looked at the scene in front of her. She sighed and said, "Actually, I'm not tough enough, not cruel enough." Tang Yin was surprised. "How cruel can you be?" Rosa shook her head. This plan must have been planned by the families of those young nobles. "If I'm tough enough, I can lead everyone to break the siege of the feudal lord soldiers and kill all those young nobles in the end." Tang Yin opened his mouth and was a little dumbfounded. If they killed those young nobles, the the resources that were at their fingertips would naturally be gone. The skinny woman in front of him was indeed a woman who would rather die than live in dishonor. Well, the key is that we're still too weak. That's why we have such concerns. Wait until this time. When the situation stabilizes, the big character plan must be implemented urgently. I believe that by then, our strength will have improved. Tang, this time you must help Josiah. Okay, no problem. Rosa nodded and said, by the way, you've made a great contribution by killing Goshawk this time. Do you want any reward? Tang spread his hands and said, I haven't thought about that. The key point was that the Gray Coat Army did not have anything. As if she had seen through Tangen's thoughts, Rosa chuckled and said, for you, the Gray Coat Army does not have anything to reward you. Well, since you value the gray space so much, how about I give you a batch of these people's black armor? Tangen's heart skipped a beat. Yes, the black armor of these bounty hunters was good stuff. It was light and had good defense. It was just right for the needs of the members of the gray space. Thinking of this, he quickly said, haha, then I won't hold back. Then it's settled. I'll ask someone to send over a dozen sets of black armor later. Thank you, leader, for the reward. Tang bowed and then rubbed his hands. But isn't a dozen sets too little? Leader, you know that the gray space has been expanding recently. I can't let the brothers who come in later not have armor to wear. Rosa was stunned. She looked at the guy in front of her and hesitated for a moment. Then I'll give you another 20 sets. It was not that Rosa was stingy. The Gray Coat Army was indeed poor. Some of the reorganized elite troops did not even have suitable armor. But I plan to recruit at least 50 people. Well, I have to treat everyone equally. Tang smiled and said. The black armor was obviously very valuable. He was determined not to let go of this opportunity. At this time, a civilian officer came over and reported excitedly, Leader, there's an army messenger waiting outside the base. He said that he's asking about the time of the negotiation. Tang and Rosa were stunned. Then they looked at each other. Finally, they couldn't take it anymore. Well, the rescue failed. To prevent them from doing anything rash, starting a negotiation was the best way to appease them. Well, I'll go take a look. Go and inform all the ministers to gather in my house. Rosa nodded and followed the officer. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she turned around and said, Oh, right, Tang. I'll give you 40 sets of black armor. I still need 20 sets, however, it was too late. Luo Sha had already left in a hurry. TSK, TSK. Tang smacked his lips. I knew you would do this. Well, 30 people is just enough. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 237. Early in the morning, outside the tent, the sun rose from the east. Tang, do these clothes fit? Josiah spun around, her skirt fluttering like flowers and leaves blooming. Tang touched his nose and retracted his gaze from her slender waist without a trace. He said in the most certain tone, Absolutely. Tang didn't know if there was a myth of clay molding people in the other world. If there was, then Josiah must have put in a lot of effort from the creator. She wore a black cotton skirt with a silver-gray evening gown on the outside. The coldness of the color and the heroic face. She stood there quietly, like an orchid in an empty valley. There was no need for many people to admire her. She was already cold and elegant. Perhaps it was a mage's habit, but Josiah often showed up in a long robe. Over time, Tang also got used to Josiah's style. But now, when she appeared in front of him in a new outfit, Tang knew what kind of exquisite curves and beautiful posture were hidden under the empty robe. I brought this with me when I escaped from home. Does it not fit the image of the Gray Coat Army? Josiah touched her coat and said worriedly. Josiah was still very meticulous. Most of the people in the Gray Coat Army were of low birth, and the best clothes were only upgraded from coarse hemp to coarse cotton. Although she didn't care about this, it was inevitable that she had to consider the opinions of others, so she had always been wearing a simple robe. Most of the clothes she brought out were also cut and changed to children's sizes for gifts. Tang shook his head and said, It's not suitable for normal times, but it's just right for now. Oh, then I'm relieved. Josiah pressed her chest and then looked at the rising sun in the distance. The negotiation time is 8 o'clock. Then I'll go first. Okay, good luck. Josiah clenched her fist and waved it confidently. Don't worry. After that, she turned and walked to the center of the station. A large tent was set up there, and it was the location of the negotiation. One side's attempt to save people failed, and they were afraid of the other side's anger. One side wanted to leave this place as soon as possible and carry out the development plan. Therefore, after some discussion yesterday, Rosa decided to start the negotiations at 8 o'clock the next day. TSK. Taking advantage of the other party's departure, Tang In stroked his chin and swept his gaze over her body. Her legs were really long, so white, so smooth. Suddenly, Betsy's evaluation of Josiah in the past appeared in Tang In's mind. He covered his nose and looked up. Oh no, I can't take it anymore. His blood pressure was high. Ahem, calm down. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. In the distance, Josiah, who had just turned a corner, suddenly covered his face. The cold night wind was unable to cool down his burning hot face. Dun's taste is so strange. Perverted. Women were always sensitive to eyes that were scanning their bodies. Tang In thought that he was secretly peeping, but Josiah noticed it. Huff. She took a few deep breaths and waved her wrist to guide the cold wind to her face. Josiah's thoughts were very complicated at this time. She was embarrassed, angry, and secretly happy. She was not a person without ideas. After changing her clothes, she already knew that it was the most suitable for her cold and elegant temperament. But in the end, she did not know why, but she still subconsciously came to Tang In's tent. What was she thinking? Josiah, you're gonna die? Shame, after calming down, the temperature on her face subsided a little. Josiah tidied up his clothes and walked to the center of the station again. Needless to say, along the way, the gray coat army people who woke up early saw Josiah's most elegant side. Although the aristocratic temperament was invisible, it did indeed exist. It was just that some people were low-key and elegant, and some people were arrogant and domineering. The most obvious difference was Josiah and the group of aristocratic youths. Josiah had received the appropriate education since she was young, and under the influence of the aristocratic environment for a long time, her temperament had long been outstanding. In addition, when she joined the Gray Coat Army later, not only did she broaden her horizons, but she also learned a lot of management methods from Rosa, which made her unique temperament constantly perfect. Usually, when people talked to her, they just felt indescribably comfortable and carefree. This was the effect of her temperament being restrained on the inside and showing on the outside. But now, Josiah kept telling herself to be strong and domineering in her heart. So the Gray Coat Army people just stared blankly, amazed by her temperament and image, and ashamed to come up and greet her as usual. She walked calmly all the way to the negotiation site. At this time, Rosa and the others had already arrived. In addition to a few high-ranking members of the Gray Coat Army, there were also 2 youths like Borg. Obviously, Bosco was not the only one who wanted to fight for his juniors. At this time, Rosa was discussing the negotiation with a few ministers, and as for Borg and the other youths, they were sitting on the side obediently. Whoosh! The curtain opened. Josiah walked in and waved. Hi, Annie Rosa, old General Omeng. Good morning, everyone. Silence. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. The few people in the tent stared at the door and froze at the action just now. Josiah put down his hand in confusion, looked at himself, and then looked at the others. What's wrong? Wow. Rosa was the first to come back to her senses and opened her mouth exaggerately. Then she left her seat and came to Josiah to hug him. You're so beautiful today. This dress is also very nice. Thank you. I'll let you wear it in the future. Okay. Sigh. Although the color is okay, I can't hold it up. It can be changed. Forget it. This dress is only suitable for you. TSK. It's quite suitable for today's occasion. How did you think of it? This was Dunn's idea. That greedy guy has such taste? It seemed that as long as it was a woman, no matter what status she had, she would relish in beautiful clothes and other things. During the conversation, most of the people in the tent came back to their senses. Ahem! An old minister cleared his throat and woke up the two young men who were still obsessively looking at him. The latter blushed and lowered his head. Bosco, who was sitting in front, narrowed his eyes and nodded slightly. No one knew what was going on in his mind. The two young men exchanged a few glances and then whispered something. Sitting next to them was Borg. He disdained to participate in the discussion between the two men of the same age. He just looked at the infinitely beautiful Josiah with a complicated expression. His fists under the table were clenched as if he wanted to hold on to something firmly. After this episode, Josiah sat in her seat. Her seat was relatively at the back, but overall, there were several ministers above her, and below her were Borg and the two young men. This seat was arranged by Rosa, which undoubtedly meant something. After sitting down, Borg naturally greeted Josiah. The two of them had known each other for the longest time, and recently, they often discussed the negotiation matters together, so the conversation was very smooth. This situation obviously made the two young men very jealous. However, if they wanted to go up and talk because they were not familiar with each other, they could only say a few words of courtesy before retreating in defeat. At this time, the corner of Borg's mouth twitched imperceptibly, as if he was laughing at the two young men for overestimating themselves. In fact, that was exactly what he meant. After a while, Rosa frowned and raised his head to ask the recording staff behind him, "What time is it now?" 8:30 leader. Rosa nodded, his face a little ugly. The two sides agreed to meet at 8 o'clock, and the negotiators lived in the camp, which was only 10 miles away, so it was easy for them to come over. However, now that they had not arrived, it was inevitable that they did not pay enough attention to them. After about half an hour, Rosa stood up with a sullen face. "That's all for today. Inform the guards that if they come, stop them from entering. If they want to negotiate again, tell them to come tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. If they still don't arrive on time tomorrow morning, tell them to prepare 19 coffins." The meaning was obvious because there were 19 noble young men in total at this time at the entrance of the camp. War horses, soldiers, and luxurious carriages were all present. It was obvious that they were ready, but as if they were waiting for an important person, they looked at the entrance of the camp from time to time and did not leave. At this time, the burly Barlow jumped off his horse and walked to a carriage. He bowed and said, "Sir Bullet, when can we leave?" Bullet was a very common name, and there was nothing to be surprised about. However, if the family prefix of Bradley was added, it was enough to make people scream, because this was the family name of the Prime Minister of the Empire. "Ha!" The door opened, revealing a few curly-haired old nobles sitting inside, and a luxurious interior decoration. "General Barlow, we can leave at any time. However, we need to wait for Sir Philip to arrive. He is also a member of this negotiation." An old noble with a red face spread out his hands and said helplessly, "Then when can Sir Philip arrive? It's more than an hour past the negotiation time now." "Sorry, we don't know. Wait a little longer. I've already sent someone to rush him." "Okay." General Baylor saluted with a stiff expression and then retreated. "Philip? That guy who brought a woman into the camp?" "Humph. He was noisy for half the night last night. It would be strange if he could get up now." The old nobles in the carriage looked at each other and shook their heads. A noble with a gloomy expression said, "I really don't understand. Why do they have to put an unrelated person into the negotiation team? Could it be that his relatives have been captured?" A fat noble next to him said hesitantly, "It is said that he wants to see the scenery of the north." "Damn it, what scenery is there to see here?" The gloomy old noble said unhappily, "I would believe it if he said that he wants to see the women of the north. Humph, this is not in vain for his title of Imperial Wolf." The others looked at each other and smiled meaningfully. Philip's nickname of the Wolf of the Imperial City was not wrong. The number of young ladies and madams he had harmed was uncountable. That Sir Cecil, the gloomy noble, had a daughter who had suffered a calamity. At this time, Bolett pinched the bridge of his nose and said, "Stop arguing. It is said that this is the second prince's idea." The carriage suddenly fell into silence. The princes of the empire did not get along. This was something that everyone in the noble circle knew. This involved the family affairs of the emperor of the empire. Although they had high positions and power, they did not dare to casually talk about these things. Tap, tap, tap. Someone knocked on the window. "Master, the person who invited Sir Philip has returned." "Yes, he said that he would get up and bring a few friends to go hunting. He can't go to the negotiation." "Damn it, this womanizer." Sir Cecil slammed his teacup on the table. "What friends? Isn't it just those loose women he found from who knows where?" At this point, the old nobles smiled bitterly. This Philip was quite capable. They had come to the north together, but he had unknowingly hooked up with a few more women right under their noses. Moreover, their eyesight was very sharp. They could easily see that two of them should be of noble birth. They could not help but sigh at their old age. Their charm was no longer there, and the current atmosphere was very bad. Cough, cough. The fat noble cleared his throat. He did not look at Sir Cecil's ugly expression and said to everyone, "Since Sir Philip can't come, let's set off first." Bolett nodded and then said to the window, "Go and tell General Baylor that we will set off now." "Yes, master." After waiting for a long time, the noble negotiation team finally left the camp and officially set off. Apart from the luxurious carriages, there were also the guards led by Baylor, as well as some arrogant-looking soldiers wearing shiny golden fish scale armor. It was only a distance of 10 kilometers, even if the carriages slowed down. Less than half an hour later, they still arrived outside the Gray Coat Army's encampment. However, when they arrived, the soldiers who opened the way found that they could no longer enter. Outside the encampment, a young soldier holding a spear said with a taut face, "This is the encampment of the Gray Coat Army. Please leave quickly." The captain wearing the fish scale armor frowned and said impatiently, "Didn't I say? We are the team that came to negotiate. This is the encampment of the Gray Coat Army. Please leave quickly." The soldier repeated his previous words and added, "If you don't leave, we will take offensive measures." The captain was stunned and then shouted, "Are you King deaf or blind? Can't you see the convoy behind us? We have an appointment with your leader to negotiate. If something happens, can a small soldier like you bear the responsibility?" "Oh, so it's like that." The young soldier seemed to have just heard this and continued in a rigid voice. "Our leader said that due to your impolite behavior, the negotiation time has been changed to 7 in the morning tomorrow. If you don't arrive tomorrow, you will bring your coffins to collect your corpses. Now you can go back. Go back." The captain was angry and pushed the young soldier away. "What kind of joke is this? We rushed here from afar, and now you are telling us to go back?" Slap. The young soldier wanted to say something, but was slapped on the head. He turned around innocently, and his body shook. He stood up straight and shouted, "Captain, you don't know how to fight back when someone attacked you?" A middle-aged man with a face full of vicissitudes walked out from behind. "Don't say that you are a soldier of the spear formation breaking team in the future. I can't afford a loose face like that. You are the captain." The captain wearing the golden fish scale armor let out a sigh of relief. "Since you are here, can you let us in now?" "There is no rush." The middle-aged man waved his hand and moved his wrist. "Let us settle the matter of you attacking my soldier first." "Attack?" The captain was confused. He only pushed him. Was that considered an attack? Before he could figure it out, a fist filled his vision. Bang! The captain was sent flying a few meters away like a broken sack. He didn't make a sound and fainted. Did you see that? This is the style of the spear formation breaking team. Remember that? "Yes, captain." The soldiers wearing the fish scale armor stared blankly at the unconscious captain. Then they looked at the middle-aged man who was teaching his subordinates. "Damn it. How dare you? Take your weapons. Damn it. You are too arrogant. Teach them a lesson." In an instant, the other soldiers drew their weapons and surrounded them. Who were they? They were the royal guards. Even some low-ranked knights would have to be polite to them. Who would have thought that they would be humiliated by a gatekeeper? "Oh, you want to gang up on us?" The middle-aged man with the face full of vicissitudes of life expressed his shock. He took the spear from the soldier's hand. "You step back first. See if your captain was bluffing." After he finished speaking, he waved his spear and straightened his body. A tragic aura was released. The soldier in front was instantly thrown to the ground. Instead of retreating, he stepped forward. Look carefully. When you are surrounded by the enemy, you must first judge the attack range of each weapon. Then, whoosh, the spears swept out like a twister, and several soldiers who were also holding spears were thrown to the ground. Then, you must use the distance advantage of the weapon in your hand. Like this, hiss, hiss, hiss. The spear shadows were not dense, but they were absolutely accurate. He knocked the swords out of the soldiers' hands. Then, he turned his body and swept the back of his spear, sending the soldiers flying. It is important to kill the enemy on the battlefield, but it is more important to protect yourself while killing the enemy. Under the young soldier's admiring gaze, the middle-aged man with a face full of vicissitudes of life waved his spear. He was surrounded by soldiers, and no one was his match. At this time, at the rear of the camp, Tang In, with a smile on his face, said to Josiah beside him, "I told you before that Fry is the captain of the lightning spear formation breaking team. He is always the first to attack the enemy camp. So, he is best at this kind of siege battle." Josiah nodded and praised. He could defeat a team of soldiers by himself. That is amazing. Haha, that is not the most amazing thing. The main thing is that these soldiers are too useless. At this point, Tang In shook his head. If he had been training in the army, he would be at least a high-level warrior now. What a pity. Oh, but I think he is already very powerful now. Tang, can you do the same? Josiah turned and asked. Ordinary soldiers have no problem. Tang In touched his nose and spread out his hands. But I am an assassin. How can I run into a crowd to fight? It is handsome enough, but it is easy to die. Then what will you do? Me? I am fast. So, I will stroll around a periphery, kill one, and come out. When they're not paying attention, I will go in and kill another one. That sounds so wretched. Assassins are all wretched, Tang In said disapprovingly, then turned his head. How is it? Are you in a better mood now? Josiah said in surprise. Huh. Tang In shrugged. You spent time and effort to dress up so beautifully, but these people were late. They clearly did not give you face. Now that they have been taught a lesson, don't you feel better? Josiah did not know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at Tang In, then said with a serious face, Yes, I feel better, but it is still not enough. TSK. Women are indeed greedy. Tang In shook his head and looked helpless. Then, his eyes lit up and he pointed at the middle-aged man who was running at high speed in the distance. Ha! An expert is here. You can feel good now. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 238. Stop. Before the person arrived, his voice was heard. Thunder roared like a tide, showing that this person's fighting aura was not weak. Previously, these soldiers in golden scale armor were just clearing the way. Now that they were being obstructed and even attacked, the officer at the back naturally could not sit still. This person, Tang In squinted his eyes and looked at the burly man with a full beard who was rushing over. Josiah turned his head in surprise. Tang, what's the matter? Oh, nothing. I ran into an acquaintance. Tang In touched his nose a little awkwardly. This bearded man was the convoy guard he had met a few days ago when he was returning to the station with the sick little Carol. At that time, he said that he would return the horse if they met again in the future. But after returning, the horse was taken to the logistics department by David and the others to be chopped up and made into horse meat hot pot. The bearded man was a little too late. By the time he came over, the soldiers were all lying on the ground, moaning in pain. Although there were no casualties, the soldiers on the ground were in a sorry state. The man looked at Fry with a gloomy face. What is the meaning of this? Why did you attack my soldiers for no reason? When he noticed this side, more than half of the soldiers were lying on the ground, so his gaze swept over the gray coat army soldiers one by one. When he saw Josiah behind them, he was stunned. As for the ordinary-looking Tang, and next to him, he was naturally ignored. "Huh, as expected of the royal guards. You're so proficient in this accusation." Fry curled his lips and said sarcastically. The man frowned and looked at Fry seriously. The Royal Guards was a title more than 10 years ago. Now it's the Royal Guards. "Who are you?" "Oh, you changed your name?" Fry raised his eyebrows in surprise, then shook his head and sighed. "It doesn't matter who I am. To be honest, when I see you Royal Guards, I'm in a bad mood. Back then, when the retarded noble who caused the Thunderbolts army to lose more than half of its members came to the Thunderbolts army, he was accompanied by these arrogant Royal Guards." After sighing with emotion, Fred continued, "Forget it. Let's cut to the chase. Because of your lack of punctuality, the negotiation will be postponed to 7 in the morning. Well, a friendly reminder, if you don't arrive tomorrow, you might need to come and collect the corpses of those young nobles." "What?" The burly man was stunned when he heard this, but he quickly regained his composure. "We're very sorry about this matter." Could you explain it to your leader face to face?" Fry shrugged. "That's the order we received." "So no." The man's face darkened. He stared at Fry and asked again, "You are me?" "I'm just a guard." "Since it's a guard, you can just go and report it. I will naturally explain everything to your leader." "Why are you here, wasting your breath?" The man's patience had been exhausted. If it wasn't for the fact that Fry wasn't simple, he would have already swung his sword to get back at the soldier. Fry smacked his lips and didn't respond to the man. He waved his hand, and the soldiers at the gate of the encampment raised their weapons. "This is the encampment of the Gray Coat Army. Please leave quickly, or you'll have to bear the consequences." "Huh." The man was so angry that he laughed. Good. I can even enter the imperial city of Bran. You think I can't step over a small guard like you? I will first seek justice for what happened before." As soon as he finished speaking, the man stepped forward and swung his sword. Although the attack was sudden, Fry, who had experienced hundreds of battles, wouldn't fall for it. His long spear shook and instantly drew a huge spear flower. Ding, ding, ding. Under the continuous spear shadows, the man's large sword was hit several times in the air and deviated from its original attack path. The offensive and defensive situations changed instantly. Fry stepped forward, his long spear as agile as a snake, not leaving the opponent's vital points. Roar! The man was angry. At first, he really didn't take Fry seriously. Although he had defeated some soldiers, who was he? That was a high-level martial artist. How could a small guard like him contend against such a person? Chi! A blue light covered the large sword. The serious man immediately released his fighting energy. At this moment, a green light flashed in front of his eyes. Then, he saw layers of green spear shadows whizzing toward him. This fighting energy? The man opened his mouth wide and was completely stunned. Of course, Do-Chi was not something rare. But since when did a gatekeeper have Do-Chi? Was the strength of the Gray army that strong? Bang, bang, bang. After a few exchanges of fighting energy, the man finally determined Frey's strength. He was a mid-level warrior. Well, to be precise, he was at the peak of a mid-level warrior. Fortunately, the man's nerves were numb. As long as he didn't exceed a high-level warrior, it was fine. Chi, a blue crescent sword slashed out. Tang, this person is a high-level warrior? Josiah saw the sword slash and immediately asked nervously, "Quickly go and help Brother Fry." The difference between a high-level warrior and a mid-level warrior was huge, even if the mid-level warrior was at the peak. The specific situation could be seen from the battle between Zwafan and Yema 2 days ago. Although Zwafan only had 1 foot in the Void Realm, he was still able to defeat the 3 peak Earth Realm warriors. "Don't worry." Tang's expression relaxed as he stared at the field. Although the man is a beginner high-level warrior, his fighting experience is obviously not as good as Daoist Frey's. This battle can still be fought. Tang Yin, who had experienced many life and death battles, naturally had good eyesight. The situation in the field was indeed like this. Although the burly man's Do-Chi cultivation was higher, the two of them were basically in a balance. The main reason for this was the man. His fighting energy and martial arts were fine, but his grasp of the key moments was lacking. To put it bluntly, he wasn't ruthless enough. On the other hand, although Fry was in a difficult situation when dodging the sword slash, he seemed to be at ease at other times. His attacking frequency was even higher. On one hand, it was because of Frey's practical and efficient fighting skills. On the other hand, it was because Fry didn't care about the attacks that might stab him in unimportant places. Or rather, he directly exchanged injuries for injuries. Of course, this didn't mean that he didn't cherish his own life. This was a unique feeling of fighting after experiencing hundreds of battles. In short, he was exchanging his opponent's life with the smallest price. The man was obviously not used to this kind of attack rhythm. He could have seriously injured Fry, but he kept losing opportunities due to his hesitation. It wasn't that he didn't have the strength, but he didn't have the guts. The Royal Guard's duties were obvious just from the name. Logically speaking, the soldiers here should be carefully selected. One of them should be able to fight against 10. In fact, this was indeed the case for the soldiers selected from the various legions when they first joined. However, the prosperity of the imperial capital, the beauties, and the fine wine had unknowingly caused their muscles to loosen and their battle awareness to weaken. Just like this burly man with a face full of whiskers, he had a body full of high-level fighting energy, but the sword light he sent out turned into fireworks. The situation of a battle had always been one side's weakness and the other's strength. The big man's side had many misgivings and couldn't display their full strength. As for Fry, the more he fought, the more confident he became. The long spear was like a dragon in the clouds, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. The big man could only parry and had no strength to fight back. Break! With a clear shout, the blue radiant sword was deflected several meters away. Then, the burly man's body fell backwards like a bowed shrimp. Bang! He landed on the ground and rolled. Before he could get up, a green-edged spear steadily stopped him between his eyebrows. It was sharp and bone-chilling. The soldiers who had been taught a lesson earlier had already gotten up. When they saw the scene in front of them, their minds were in a mess. Defeated? The captain of the Royal Guards was defeated. Furthermore, he was defeated by a gatekeeper. God, this world is too crazy. I can't stand it. Tomorrow, you have to be early. I won't see you off. After saying this, Fry neatly put away the spear on his back and walked away. The burly man had been staring blankly at the sword stuck in the ground not far away, as if he hadn't recovered from the shock. Wow, Captain is mighty and domineering. The young soldiers gathered around Fry and flattered him. The middle-aged soldiers behind them looked normal. How many years had it been? As long as their captain went out to battle, he would always return victorious. Tang in behind them couldn't help but clap his hands and praise sincerely. Fry's amazing. No matter what the reason was, it was inconceivable for a mid-level warrior to defeat a high-level warrior. If Fry killed this burly man with one stab on the battlefield, it would be a great military merit. At this moment, clop, 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 the sound of horse hooves rolled over. The burly Baylor rushed over with the Royal Guards battalion. He dismounted and didn't even look at the Royal Guard soldiers. He walked directly to Fry with an excited expression. "Captain, I've finally seen your marksmanship on the battlefield once again." Fry waved his hand and asked the bewildered soldiers to retreat. He laughed softly and said, "Madman, don't call me captain. You and I are enemies now. We might meet on the battlefield one day. If such a day really comes, I won't hold back." After saying this, Baylor said sincerely, "But you will always be my captain." Huh. Fry laughed loudly. He took a step forward and hugged Baylor, patting each other's backs. They had been comrades for many years. Now, one was a general of an army, and the other was a gatekeeper. Their standpoints were different. It was true that they would fight to the death on the battlefield. But at the same time, their friendship was also true. This was the cruel nature of men on the battlefield. It was also the charm of men on the battlefield. "Captain, thank you. I've long been annoyed by those Royal Guards who want to hang their eyeballs in the sky." Fry was stunned. Then, he laughed loudly and hammered Baylor's shoulder. The carriages were not far away. Baylor had obviously seen the situation here long ago. However, He had waited until now to appear. There was no doubt that he had a plan. Valor looked at Frey's simple wooden armor and said with a smile that was not a smile, "Captain, the Gray Coat Army looks down on people too much. They actually made you guard the door. How about it? Follow me. I've thought about it. I'll give you a fake identity. It won't be a problem for you to be a division commander." Puffed. A middle-aged veteran with a thin body, but his bones were like iron, walked up from behind. "Just now, you were still calling me captain. In the end, you only gave me a division commander. You still have a nerve to say that. Skinny monkey, don't wrong a good person. If we go any further, we'll have to investigate the third generation of the family." Baylor said helplessly. TSK, you're a general after all." "Madman, I haven't seen you for many years. You've seen a lot." Another mocking sentence was heard. A veteran with a bear-like body walked over. "Big bear, you? All right. Brothers, I was wrong." Baylor spread out his hands and smiled bitterly. After greeting them, Baylor still took the time to ask Fry, "Captain, how is it?" Even if it was a division commander, it was not easy to become one. However, this seemed like a joke. Who could say for sure that it was not true? "Haha, madman, just be a general obediently. Don't make such a joke." After pausing for a moment, Fry pointed at the wooden armor on his body. "You know my personality? I knew it would be like this." Baylor nodded. His expression darkened slightly. Very quickly, he let out a long breath. "Since that's the case, I'll give you a gift." After saying that, he turned around and removed a long cloth bag from the horse's back and threw it over. Fry caught it and was immediately stunned. He stroked it twice and said with a complicated expression, "Thank you, madman. What are you thanking me for? This was originally yours." Baylor flipped onto the horse's back and bowed simply. Then, "Captain and brothers, I'll take my leave first. Haha, hurry up and get lost. The next time we meet on the battlefield, I'll charge into your tent and pinch your balls off." Ha! Amidst the vulgar insults, Baylor let out a long laugh and left on his horse. From the beginning to the end, he did not look at the group of royal guards on the ground who were in a daze. At this moment, Fry untied the string on the cloth bag. A green spear made of an unknown metal instantly slid out. The body of the spear was as bright as a mirror, and the blade of the spear was as sharp as wheat. Frey's large hand tightened again. A feeling of blood connection that he had not felt in a long time surged in his heart. It was as if an enemy army had appeared in front of him again. Lightning spear. Lightning spear. Lightning spear. The few middle-aged veterans around them looked at the green spear and could not help but cry out involuntarily. Back then, the lightning spear formation breaking team that defeated all enemies had this lightning spear at the front of the formation. Over time, the team also took it as its name. After waving it twice, Fry stabbed out. Chi. A green light instantly covered the spear. The tip of the spear spat out a brilliance that resembled lightning. The thunderclap ninth heaven was hidden in the clouds and revealed in the lightning. Where the tip of the spear pointed, it pierced through the heavens. Apologies, the civet cat's stomach is revolting and has not recovered. He forced himself to hold on yesterday, but today, he suffered retribution. AI. I'll first write 4,000 chapters and give them to you. I'll make up for the rest tomorrow. Lastly, I'll continue to ask for a recommendation vote. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 239. The next day, the night wind had yet to dissipate, and dawn had just arrived. Just like the day before, the soldiers and carriages were all prepared at the entrance of the army camp. One by one, the old nobles walked out of their tents, looking dispirited and yawning. They were all muttering softly, cursing the guards who had woken them up, as well as the untactful gray-clothed commoners. To be honest, they still did not think much of this group of lowly commoners. However, because they had exceeded the scheduled time yesterday, they had been given the cold shoulder. Today, they did not dare to be too negligent. After all, no one could be sure that this group of rioters would not really commit murder. Just as they reached the entrance of the camp, a wave of complaints was suddenly heard. Hey, Old knights, your actions are too slow. The few old nobles were stunned, looking at the luxurious carriage in front of them in disbelief. In this camp, there were not many people who dared to speak so rudely to them. However, the youth in front of them, who was standing in front of the carriage and waving his hands continuously, was one of them. Philip. The fat noble rubbed his eyes, confirming that his blurry eyes were not playing tricks on him. The surrounding old nobles looked at each other in dismay. Why was this womanizer so active today? Philip shrugged and spread his arms exaggeratedly. It can't be. We haven't seen each other for a night, and you don't remember me? The future of the negotiations is worrying. Does this mean that he has Alzheimer's? Cough, cough. The surrounding soldiers all shifted their gazes away. The gloomy old noble Cecil snorted, the corner of his mouth twitching. You should be worried about dying in the belly of a woman one day. It was obvious that he had seen the figure of a woman in the carriage that was not closed. Oh, thank you for your blessings. Philip beamed and bowed in a standard manner. This is my greatest wish in life. The corners of the eyes of the few old nobles twitched, speechless at this despicable fellow in front of them. They simply flicked their sleeves and boarded their own carriage out of sight, out of mind. All right, let's go, let's go. Philip urged the soldiers to move forward impatiently. He stroked his chin and muttered to himself, Are there really beautiful women in the gray coat army? That fellow isn't lying to me, is he? It's hard to say. Even the wildflowers by the roadside have a different taste. TSK, I'm really looking forward to it. Having learned their lesson from last time, the negotiation team arrived at the Gray Coat Army's encampment before 7 o'clock. The Gray Coat Army soldiers guarding the entrance led the group of people in. Naturally, carriages and the like were not allowed to enter. After all, this was an underground passage. At this moment, the Gray Coat Army was having breakfast. Groups of commoners were holding their bowls as they looked at the group of well-dressed people. Some children were hiding behind the adults, curious as to why the elders had curly hair. The leader this time was Gary from the Blue Flame Legion. He looked at the Gray Coat Army soldiers who were in rags and looked weak. He couldn't help but sigh. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed that such a group of people could withstand the attacks of tens of thousands of armed soldiers from the three major armies for almost a month. What are they eating? The sexy lady leaning against Philip pointed at the green food in the bowls and asked curiously, Oh, that. Wild vegetables by the roadside. Philip, who was looking around, turned his head and said casually, Isn't that just wild grass? Can they be eaten? Why don't they eat meat? The lady asked in confusion. Philip was stunned for a moment. He then raised the lady's chin and said, Do you know? I like how you look when you have big boobs and no brains. The tent in the middle of the encampment was the venue for the negotiation. The noble negotiation team lifted the curtain and entered. There were only simple tables and chairs inside. There isn't even a cup of tea. Someone mumbled, and the negotiators sat on the right side of the long table. Where are your people? Isn't it 7 o'clock yet? Cecil looked at the empty chair opposite him and said unhappily to the Gray Coat Army soldier at the entrance, Sorry, I'll go and ask. The soldier bowed and left. His tone was polite and his attitude was proper. The old nobles didn't mind and chatted with each other about the situation they saw when they entered the encampment. These nobles who had been staying in the bustling imperial capital, all this while only knew the name of the Gray Coat Army. Now that they saw the actual situation, they didn't think much of it. They were just a bunch of poor motley crew. It seemed that the condition they would raise later would be food. The discussion went on for more than 10 minutes. Some of the nobles frowned and looked at the entrance of the tent. What was going on? Where was the soldier just now? Why wasn't he back yet? After the question was asked, the other guard nodded and said, How about this? I'll go and take a look. After saying that, he ran away. After that, there was no more after that. The two Gray Coat Army guards had run away. The ones standing outside the tent were the royal guards and the soldiers of the Legion. The group of nobles was shocked to find that they were abandoned here. After an unknown amount of time, bang! Cecil slammed the long table and said angrily, What are these damned commoners trying to do? That's right. We arrived on time, but they were nowhere to be seen. These country bumpkins don't know how to be polite. Before you say that others are impolite, you should think about your own actions first. The curtain was lifted and Rosa walked in with a calm face. It's 8 o'clock now. Everyone, I'm Rosa. Good morning. The tent was silent. To be honest, the name Rosa was quite famous, especially after the kidnapping of the young nobles. This name had become a headache for many people. But after seeing her for real, this slightly thin and short figure, her beautiful facial features didn't stand out in the light of her dull skin. If one were to disregard her unique temperament, one would believe that in a small city in the South, there would be tens of thousands of women who had passed away in their prime. However, this was Rosa. She was the one who had led the Gray Coat Army and fought against the nobles of the Bran Empire for more than 10 years. She would continue to fight until the end. While the group of nobles was still in shock, old General Ormond, Bosco, and the other high-ranking members of the Gray Coat Army walked in one after another. Then, a black shadow flashed by the door. Josiah walked in with a cold expression. The nobles who had just recovered from their shock were shocked again. These nobles lived in the prosperous capital and had seen many beautiful women. Naturally, there were some who were prettier than Josiah. However, sometimes, under certain circumstances, some beautiful things would be added with a mysterious glow. For example, looking at a beauty under the light or the current situation. They'd seen the images of the people in the Gray Coat Army before. Most of them were covered in dust and dressed simply. Now that they saw the infinitely elegant Joshua in front of them, they were naturally stunned. At this moment, a voice rang out from behind them. Bang! There was a loud sound. Everyone was stunned. They turned to look at the end of the right side and saw a chair overturned. Philip, who was completely unprepared, fell to the ground in a sorry state. As for the reason, they could tell by looking at the angry and jealous woman beside him. Ahem! The corner of Bullet's eyes twitched. He stood up and cleared his throat. He introduced the people on his side. As for the woman, she gave him a vague answer. Rosa also briefly introduced the people on his side. Seeing that the other party did not have any questions, he was about to announce the start of the negotiation. Wait! Philip, who was sitting back on the chair, suddenly raised his right hand. I have a question. Everyone looked at him strangely. It was just the beginning. What questions could there be? Say it. Rosa spread out his hands. Philip stood up and quickly tidied up his clothes. His charming face bloomed with a smile. He elegantly bowed to Josiah, who was sitting in front of him. Hi, beautiful Miss Josiah. My name is Philip. I am unmarried. I live in the Blue Crystal District of Bran City. The tent was completely silent. Everyone's expression froze. They heard the rapid and clear words coming out of Philip's mouth. Your beauty is comparable to the most holy flower in the world. Please allow me to express my amazement to you. Please give me, your admirer who fell in love with you at first sight, a chance to pursue you. Please. After a full 3 minutes of silence, the room was completely silent. Boring. Josiah turned her head away. Her face was cold. Of course, her heart was not as calm as it looked. At this time, there was a stormy sea inside. It almost broke her tense face. Don't be like this. At least give me a chance. Ouch. Philip, who was depressed, suddenly screamed. Then his face was twisted. His left hand kept pulling the woman's fingers that were pinching his thigh. Well, can we start the negotiation? Bullet asked expressionlessly. Yes. After this episode, the negotiation began to return to the normal track. Because Josiah was facing Philip, the two of them could not avoid eye contact, and the latter kept staring at her with infatuated eyes. Of course, he was also constantly using his hands to protect the muscles on his legs and waist. Initially, Joshua did not want to make eye contact with this strange fellow. However, thinking of the domineering manner in which Tang had instructed him, he tried his best to adjust his emotions and shifted his cold gaze over. You're a toad. You're a toad. Philip was happy at first, but then he was stunned. Contempt, sarcasm, ridicule. Being stared at by a beautiful woman like this. Any man would feel very uncomfortable. Philip could not help but touch the corner of his mouth. There was no rice. He looked down at his clothes. Well, the crotch of his pants was not open either. The negotiation continued in this strange atmosphere until Rosa took out a few exchange lists and handed them over. Bang! After Bullet finished reading, he slapped the list on the table with a pale face. Are you sure you are not joking? Of course. Rosa leisurely sipped her tea. Damn it, you are extorting. Bullet's face turned red. 200,000 kilograms of grain, 150,000 kilograms of flour, 30,000 sets of standard armor, 50,000 weapons. And 100 Mjolnir? This is too much. Nonsense. Do you think you are the brand's army? There is no way to negotiate. You are robbing us. After the exchange lists were handed over, the noble negotiation group was naturally furious. The Empire had sent them to negotiate because they had experience in this area. But even so, they were still shocked by the huge amount of money in front of them. It was a negotiation. In fact, both sides had a standard in their hearts. The difficulty was to reach a balance that both sides could accept. But the exchange list in front of them was filled with densely packed words. Obviously, the standard had been raised infinitely. There was no need to bargain. Oh, is that so? Rosa sneered, put down her teacup, and looked at Josiah. Josiah understood and nodded. He stood up and picked up a list. As of 3 days ago, the Gray Coat Army had a total of 13,456 soldiers sacrificed, and 732 innocent civilians lost their lives. In these 3 days, because of your stupid actions, another 1,141 soldiers and civilians lost their lives. Taking a deep breath, Josiah's face was cold. You said that we are too much. Then how about these innocent people who died? How much is the value of their lives? In my opinion, their value is much more than this exchange list. If this is extortion, then today, I will use this to blackmail you. The tent once again regained its silence, and the complaints that fell to the ground continued to spiral inside. Bullet swallowed and said with difficulty, I am sorry, but this is war. Yes, this is war. Josiah interrupted him. Anyone can start a war, but to end a war, the victor must agree. We are the victors now, so either we hand over the items or we collect the corpses. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 240. A bird with beautiful feathers only knows how to sing, and that's why it was caught by hunters. This was a proverb from the other world that was usually used to describe flashy things that had no substance. For example, delicate vases that were fragile, or beautiful women. God was fair. After spending a lot of effort to create a woman with a jade-like face, he would remove things like brains and intelligence. The nobles had the same attitude toward Josiah. Although they were stunned by her beauty, to be honest, they didn't take her seriously. This wasn't just a matter of judging a person by appearance. Their eyes were very sharp, and from the arrangement of the other side, they could tell that Rosa and the few senior officials were the main force of this negotiation. The young men and women behind them were probably here to see the situation. When the negotiation started, it was just as they had expected. Rosa and the few ministers were the ones talking. However, when this beautiful girl came out of nowhere and threw down these tough words, they were caught off guard and were shocked. Even Bolite's excuse was caught by the other party and turned against him. Anyone can start a war, but to end a war, the victor must agree. We are the victors, so either hand over the goods or collect the corpses. These old nobles with rich negotiation experience naturally knew that in a negotiation, momentum was very important. From a certain perspective, this was a battlefield where one could subdue the enemy without fighting. But now, because of this beautiful girl's sudden outburst, their momentum had been taken away. Of course, this was just the beginning of the negotiation. No matter what, these old nobles would never agree to this exchange. This was because it was too exaggerated. If they agreed, their reputation would be ruined for the rest of their lives. Cough, cough. Cecil was the first to speak. We're discussing how to exchange the hostages in your hands, not how to settle the score after the war. Moreover, if the war continues, the victor should be us." "That's right." The fat noble nodded and said, "The war stopped a week ago, so we don't know anything about what happened 3 days ago." One by one, the old nobles spoke up, trying their best to pull the situation back to their side. Among them, Philip and the woman behaved strangely. Philip was looking at Josiah's frosty side profile with stars in his eyes. Too perfect, too elegant, too visually impactful. "I've decided I must get her." As for the woman, she was undoubtedly even angrier when she saw Philip's expression. Under the table, her legs and hands were already locked by Philip. She was now considering whether to use her teeth. Shameless. At this moment, Josiah was incomparably furious, especially when he heard the other party deny that the camp was in chaos 3 days ago. When the old nobles saw that Josiah was angry, they were delighted. In the end, he was still inexperienced. On the negotiation table, anger would only make one lose their rationality. Besides, they were also very willing to debate around this issue. Because of this discussion, the previously forceful proposal of an exchange would undoubtedly be thrown aside. "Josiah." At this moment, Luo Shah suddenly called out. He knocked on the exchange list on the table and shook his head. Josiah was stunned for a moment before sitting down. The chaos 3 days ago was naturally real, but they did not have any actual evidence. The other party issued the mission from the Bounty Hunter Union, where the employer's information was kept strictly confidential. Even the bounty hunters did not know. If they were to debate about this, the other party could argue endlessly until noon. Originally, according to the fixed procedure, after the exchange list came out, they would begin to bargain. But now that the noble negotiation team did not agree with this list, they could only go back to the beginning and start to discuss the items on the list. "Remove the armor and weapons. These are military supplies. We can't get them." "Oh, you can't get them?" "You are insulting our intelligence. I used to be a Viscount, and I could get so many armor and weapons." "Mjolnir is impossible. This is the military's most important weapon. Besides, if we give it to you, will you use it?" "You don't have to worry about this. If you go to the Northern military and ask around, you will know that we once used this to destroy a company of heavy soldiers." The tent was in a mess. Losha and the others who were at the front of the long table were having a heated discussion, while Josiah and the others who were at the back were more or less idle. Philip took the opportunity to stretch his head over, wanting to continue the unfinished conversation with Josiah. But because of the interference of the woman next to him, he was somewhat embarrassed. However, Josiah did not pay attention to him. He was focused on listening to the negotiation. On the other hand, Borg and the two youths stared at Philip from time to time. If it wasn't for the occasion, they would have found a secluded corner to put a sack on Philip and beat him up until his charming face turned into a pig's head. The atmosphere of the negotiation here was getting more and more intense, and it was about to escalate into a quarrel. There was also a small fight outside the tent. "Brother, wait a minute." In the passage, a young man holding a pot of tea was called out. Tang En came out from the side and said, "Is this for the negotiation tent?" "Oh, yes." Tang En nodded and said, "I will bring this pot of tea in." "Okay." The young man handed the pot over without hesitation. Tang En, who was about to say his name, was stunned and said, "Aren't you afraid that I'm a spy or something and put poison in it?" The young man spread out his hands and said, "How can that be? Don't you remember me? I have a deep impression of you, Captain Tang. You were the one who made me chase after Josiah. For half a day, you really made me famous in the publicity department." Tang, and opened his mouth, then touched his nose awkwardly. He remembered this young man who brought him to meet Losha for the first time, but was pranked by him in the end. "Ahem, I'm sorry about that." "Ha, it's okay." The young man shrugged and said casually, "My name is Colin. I admire Captain Tang's big poster plan very much. When the time comes to implement it, I hope Captain Tang can help." "No problem." Tang En nodded. In his heart, he thought, it seems that Losha values the big poster plan very much. He has already started preparing it. After greeting him, Tang Yen said goodbye to the young man named Colin, then walked towards the tent with the teapot. At this time, at the entrance of the tent, there were two groups of gray coat army soldiers. The others were the royal guards and the soldiers of the Legion. The relationship between the two sides was naturally not friendly, especially between the gray coat army soldiers and the soldiers of the Legion. When the two sides looked at each other, it was almost as if they were glaring at each other. In the previous month, the two sides fought fiercely. The number of comrades who died in the hands of the other side was innumerable. Now that they saw each other, it was natural that the eyes of the enemies would turn red. However, both of them were restrained. They knew that today was not the time for revenge. As for the royal guards, they were much more relaxed. They did not stand in front of the tent like the soldiers, but gathered together to sit on the ground and chat to pass the time. Tang Yen wanted to enter the tent to see the situation inside, but just as he arrived in front of the tent, a loud shout sounded. "Stop!" Tang Yen turned his head in surprise and saw a burly man with a full beard walking out of the royal guards. Walking in front of him, the burly man looked suspiciously at Tang Yen's face. "Have we met before?" Tang Yen touched his nose and remained silent. "Of course we have met before. The first time was when I stole your horse, and the other time was when I saw you get beaten up yesterday." At this time, the burly man also recalled the experience of stealing a horse, but Tang Yen's appearance was too ordinary, so he did not dare to be sure. Tang Yen looked at the burly man's expression and knew that he was only suspicious. He was about to shake his head to deny it when he suddenly heard a noise from inside the tent. "Well, I've seen it before. I stole your horse that time." Twain's mind spun a few times before he suddenly admitted it directly. "Damn it, it really is you." The burly man flew into a rage. That experience was really a disgrace to him. A group of royal guards could not stop the other party, and in the end, he had to take action, but he was actually stepped over. "What about the horse?" The burly man decided to suppress his anger and take the horse back first. That was a precious horse. If it was lost, even if Philip did not find trouble with him now, it was hard to guarantee that the other party would not settle accounts with him after they returned. "Oh, I ate it," Tang Yen said with a slightly embarrassed tone. Ate it?" The burly man's face suddenly turned from white to red, and finally to green. "You mother asterisk cur ate it? Do you know what kind of horse that was? Damn it, even if I sold you 1,000 times, it would not be worth as much as a hoof of that horse. Do you understand?" The burly man felt that he was going crazy. God, a valuable horse was slaughtered and eaten just like that. How could his appetite be so good? Is it expensive?" Tang Yen licked his lips and suddenly understood. "No wonder I said that the taste of horse meat was a bit different. It was much more delicious than some bamboo rats." "Shut up." "Huff, huff." The burly man stared at Tang Yen's face as if he wanted to eat him up. Then he looked at the teapot in his hand and asked fiercely, "Are you here to deliver the tea?" Yes." Tang Yen's eyes flashed, and he nodded. The burly man frowned and looked at Tang Yen from head to toe. Then, as if he had made a decision, he calmed down and took a step forward. "Give me a cup of tea." After he finished speaking, he did not wait for Tang Yen to react and instantly hit the bottom of the teapot. Splash, hot water gushed out, and a part of it soaked the burly man's armor. "Ah!" The burly man looked as if he had been poisoned and screamed loudly. "You gray coat army handyman, you've gone too far. You dare to splash water on me." After he finished shouting, he punched Tang Yen's head with a fist that emitted a blue light. TSK, TSK. He had put in a lot of effort. Fry was right. Sure enough, those who had been in the royal guards were experts in framing and framing others. Obviously, Tang Yen's words had deeply provoked the other party. This burly man was obviously going to be ruthless, but this was the gray coat army's encampment. If he attacked without reason, he would definitely die. But once he left this place, it would be difficult for him to touch Tang Yen in the future. So, the burly man decided to use the excuse that Tang Yen had splashed water on him to justifiably attack. However, he did miscalculate one thing, and that was Tang Yen's strength. The last time he saw Tang Yen steal a horse, he did not release any fighting energy. It seemed that he was just faster and had more combat experience. But now, the distance between them was so close. Under the suppression of his fighting energy, speed, and combat experience were useless. Good timing. Tang, inside. While the other party was scheming against him, he was also scheming against the other party. A blood-red light overflowed from his palm, and he instantly grabbed the other party's wrist. He stepped forward, twisted his waist, turned around, and flung him out. Whoosh. The burly man's body crashed into the tent like a cannonball. The flap was immediately torn open, and he crashed into the long table inside with a bang. Let me tell you, it's impossible to get so much food. If you continue talking like this, you won't get anything. Does the Gray Coat Army have any manners? We've been sitting here for so long. Why don't you serve us tea, Boom? The long table collapsed, and the burly man was buried under it. The voices inside immediately disappeared, and everyone stared blankly at the long table that had suddenly collapsed. Tang strode in and raised the teapot in his hand. Who was the one who asked for tea just now? If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 241. Who was the one who asked for tea just now? Glancing around, the fat aristocrat still pointed at the teacup. Oh, it's you. Tang walked over casually, placed the teacup in front of him, and filled it with light green tea. You? Bullet finally came back to his senses and pointed at Tang with a trembling finger. He naturally knew the man who smashed the long table. He was the captain of the Royal Guards and had the cultivation of a senior warrior. But now, he was defeated by an ordinary-looking young man who looked like a handyman. In addition to being shocked by the opponent's strength, the other reason why Bullet was speechless was that he was worried about his own situation. Was this group of insatiable Gray Coat Army going to kill all of them and then continue to blackmail them? An angry roar sounded, and a broken wood shattered. The burly man with bloodstains on his face turned over and stood up. Regardless of anything else, the blue fighting aura around his body suddenly erupted. The burly man was depressed to the extreme. Since he came to this valley, he had lost his horse right under his nose. Then, he was defeated by a gatekeeper. Now, he was knocked down by a servant who served tea. What was going on? Was he possessed by the god of misfortune? The strength of a high-level warrior was naturally powerful. Just as the burly man was about to unleash his Do Chi and sweep across the place, a dreamy palm pierced through the blue light, instantly grabbing the burly man's neck and pressing it down. Boom! The burly man fell upside down again. Tang's figure had unknowingly appeared beside him and raised the teapot. Bang, bang, bang. Don't you know others are having a meeting? Do you have any manners? Do you have any civility? The large man, whose head was covered in fresh blood, was completely stunned. All he knew now was to unleash his Do Chi to blast the other party away. Unfortunately, each of Tang's attacks shattered the Do Chi that he had gathered with great difficulty. Of course, a senior warrior would not be so weak. If the burly man had pulled out his sword and put on his fighting aura armor, he would still have a chance to fight. But unfortunately, he chose to fight in close combat, which Tang was best at. Moments later, the badly mutilated man was knocked unconscious. Sorry to disturb you. Please continue. Tang bowed apologetically and then dragged the big man outside. When he passed by Bullet, who was speechless, he scratched his hair and took out a teacup. By the way, you called me just now? Do you want to drink tea? The kettle was crooked, but only a few drops of water dripped out. Due to the protection of Tang's blood energy, the iron kettle was not deformed from the impact just now, but the water inside had spilled out. Shaking his head helplessly, Tang raised his eyebrows and pointed the bottom of the kettle at the teacup. The tip of the kettle had just been smashed into the burly man's skull. Of course, the blood that dripped out was the fishy smell. Drip, drip, drip. A minute later, half of the red liquid had spilled into the cup. I'm sorry, that's all I have, but it should taste pretty good. You can try it. After saying this rather sincerely, Tang dragged the burly man out of the tent and casually put down the torn curtain. It was dead silent in the tent. The noble negotiators stared blankly at the broken long table and the fluttering curtain. Bollet stared at the half cup of blood in front of him, the corner of his eyes twitching. Rosa was stunned at first. Then she chuckled and looked at the opposite party's expression with interest. Joshua, on the other hand, was in a state of snickering, which made Philip, who was opposite him, stare blankly once again. After Tang and made such a scene, the momentum that the old nobles had worked hard to gather naturally dissipated. Bollet, whose face was blue, tried his best to adjust his mood. He glanced at the people with different expressions and said, "Ahem, about the negotiation. You're awake. No wonder you're a senior warrior. F***CK, you dare to frame me. If I don't beat you up today, you won't know why the flowers are so red. Yo, you dare to fight back. You're asking for a beating." Bang, bang, bang. Another chaotic sound of fighting came clearly from outside. Bollet opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't continue his words in such an atmosphere. The negotiation naturally ended without a conclusion. When it was time for lunch, the two sides didn't even come up with a plan to exchange supplies. The meeting was temporarily adjourned. Everyone walked out of the tent with complicated thoughts. These nobles naturally didn't care about the food of the Gray Coat Army, so they brought some things over themselves. A gorgeous tablecloth was spread out, covering the yellow but not black soil. Silver tableware was placed one after another, shining dazzlingly under the sun. Then there were all kinds of small but exquisite food, and two slender bottles filled with wine-red liquid. In comparison, Rosa and the others, who were holding rough pottery, were undoubtedly extremely simple and crude. It was like a simple stage set up on the side of a gorgeous stage. It was an eyesore no matter how you looked at it. On the other side, Tang In, who had just stretched his body, was enjoying a big meal. Rumble, looking at the bubbling pot in front of him, with vegetables and meat slices rolling continuously, Tang asked doubtfully, "This? Where did the meat come from?" The members of the gray space who gathered together looked at each other. In the end, it was David who came up and said mysteriously, "Boss, we came back from training and saw several horses at the entrance of the encampment." Tang, and opened his mouth. At the entrance of the encampment, a group of nobles' carriages. As mentioned before, because the Gray Coat Army's encampment was full of passages, the carriages couldn't enter, so they stopped outside. Who would have thought that David, who just came back from training, would bump into them? There were guards next to the carriages, but there weren't many of them. Most of them followed the nobles into the encampment. The members of the gray space had followed Tang in for so long, so they naturally learned a lot of hiding methods. In the end, Michaud quietly took down the horse and quickly dragged it back. At this time, at the entrance of the encampment, Philip was arranging for a few guards to send the half-dead man back for treatment. "Well, you go back with them. I'll let them send you back to the city." After giving some instructions, Philip suddenly said to the woman beside him, who didn't look well. Hearing this, the woman was stunned and said in a daze, "What do you mean?" Philip spread out his arms and sighed. "Even banquets have to come to an end. My fate with you has come to an end. Well, I left you a manor in Jade Sea City." The woman, who was about to fly into a rage, trembled. She was also of noble birth, just a small one. Of course, she knew the value of a manor in Jade Sea City. The North was different from the South. If one wanted to have a manor with a complete set of facilities, one had to at least be a count or a city lord. However, the man in front of her, who seemed to never be serious, casually gave away a manor. "But didn't you say that you would love me forever?" "Well, I understand love." Philip scratched his head. "But what is forever?" Slap. The woman slapped Philip and stepped on the carriage angrily. Philip, who had a 5-finger mark on his face, was still smiling and bowing, politely saying goodbye. Sir Philip." A guard walked over hesitantly. To be honest, if not for the fact that this matter was really important, he would not be willing to provoke Philip at this time. "Yes, what is it?" Philip was not aware of this, as he still had an unconcerned smile on his face. "Your horse. One of your horses has suddenly gone missing." Philip opened his mouth, turning his head, only to see that of the 3 horses that had set off, only 2 were left now. "Who are you?" Royal guards, sir." That guard answered carefully. "Humph, Royal your mother. Damn it, I won't say anything about the horse that was stolen earlier. There was nothing I could do about it. But now, another one is missing, and you're still telling me that suddenly. The hell, your side occupation is being a horse thief, right?" The meals of the nobles were still very particular. After enjoying the exquisite food, these old nobles began leisurely tasting the tea and pastries after the meal. Right, the water was too inferior, and the tea leaves were all wasted. Even so, these nobles were still in a pretty good mood, especially after seeing the envious gazes of those country bumpkins around them. A sense of superiority arose within them. "Master, they're here." At this moment, a person who looked like a steward came over and said softly, "Well, let them in." Bullet waved his hand and let the soldiers outside make way for them. Then, a curly-haired old man and a young man came in. They were Bosco and Borg. "Please sit down." Bullet pointed to the seat in front of him and said with a smile, "Do you want to taste these dishes?" "Well, Viscount Bosco, I'm afraid you haven't tasted them for a long time." "Duke Bullet, I'm no longer a Viscount." Bosco sat down calmly and did not touch the teacup in front of him. "Ha, you're not now, but doesn't mean you won't be in the future." Bullet laughed loudly, and then took something like an invitation from the steward and handed it over. Bosco took it in silence and unfolded it. Borg glanced at it and couldn't help but tremble in his heart. There were a lot of densely packed words on it, but most of them were official phrases. The actual meaning was very simple, which was to confer the title of Viscount, but the line of family title below was empty. A beautiful manor with a long history of family symbols. A loyal old steward, a group of servants, a luxurious carriage. A respectable identity, a gilded family name in the imperial noble register. Rich merchants donated countless gold coins, generals sacrificed so much blood, administrative and civil officials worked so hard for so many generations. All they want is to say, "Hello, Sir So-and-so. You used to be a noble, so you should know that the Imperial Noble Register has been reducing the number of nobles in recent years. Although the Imperial Noble Register has taken back countless nobles' titles, only a few of them can get it back, not to mention those who were besieged for violating the law." "Haha, Viscount Bosco, you have a good eye. Of course, your luck is also good enough. Now, you can fill in your family name here." In the slightly quiet environment, there was only the sound of the silver spoon touching the teacup. Bullet's words were all to the point, and he didn't even make any requests. But the charm of it didn't decrease at all, and it even increased the room for imagination. Borg was now imagining that those scenes were familiar to him, and those feelings were exactly what he used to have. Pa. The sound of the conferring letter being closed wasn't loud, but it was enough to wake up Borg, who was breathing rapidly. Placing the letter on the tablecloth, Bosco slowly picked up the teacup in front of him that seemed to be emitting clouds. The corners of the old noble's mouths curled up slightly, revealing a smile, as if everything was under their control. "It's delicious." Bosco sighed after tasting it. Cecil smiled. "This is Cloud Dragon Mist Crown, a tribute from the Imperial family. But if Viscount Bosco likes it, I can share some with you." "Thank you, Sir Marquis, but there's no need." Bosco shook his head. "Morning tea, after-meal tea, afternoon tea. I've been thinking for the past few years about how much time I've wasted on this. Well, look, it's only been a while, and the negotiation time is almost up. Sir Marquis, let's meet again at the negotiation table in the afternoon." After leaving these 2 sentences, Bosco stood up and saluted before turning around and leaving. Borg was stunned at first, but then he quickly chased after him. The old nobles looked at each other, speechless for a long time. "Humph, you don't know what's good for you." Bullet's face was gloomy as he picked up the teacup and fiercely took a sip. "Hey, Mom, they are so pitiful, drinking a cup of water for such a long time. Are they short of water?" "Probably, I don't know either." The woman at the side dragged the child away. "Puff, cough, cough. gushing tea, violent coughing, and an abnormal flush on his old face. Not far away, Bosco and Borg were walking silently in the passage. After a moment, Bosco stopped and turned around. The negotiation in the morning was just a test. You have to seize the opportunity in the afternoon and get the initial 100,000 kilograms of grain. Borg. Oh. The absent-minded Borg was suddenly awakened, and his expression was somewhat unnatural. Bosco frowned. You're thinking about what happened just now. Borg hesitated for a moment before raising his head. I'm just curious. Father, isn't our purpose to restore the title of nobility? A trace of disappointment flashed across Bosco's face, and then he sighed. Borg, have you ever seen a duke or marquis asking me for a favor? No. Borg shook his head. Their family was only a viscount, which was far from a duke or marquis. Not to mention the other party asking for a favor. Even a word from him would be enough to make them feel flattered. But now it has happened. Bosco spread out his hands. I think you know why. Yes, it's because we're in the Gray Coat Army, and the Gray Coat Army now has the capital. In other words, if we leave the Gray Coat Army, we're nothing. Capital can appreciate, and the more the Gray Coat Army develops, the greater our capital will be, and in the future, it will even be greater than the Viscounts. You have to look at the long term and not be moved by the small interests in front of you. Understand? I understand a little. Borg nodded, but still threw out a question. But the Gray Coat Army has been hunted down, and we're betting everything on this. Isn't it too dangerous? Stupid. Bosco pinched the bridge of his nose. We're not Rosa. Even if the Gray Coat Army is eventually destroyed, we can withdraw our capital a second ago in exchange for the benefits we deserve. Borg opened his mouth, but then his heart skipped a beat, and a chill rose in his heart. He licked his lips. Father, you're talking about betraying the Gray Coat Army. Let's go, it's time for negotiation. Bosco interrupted Borg's words and walked forward with a normal expression. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 242. Steam rose, and the aroma of meat filled the air. Ha, it's done. David cheered and sprinkled a handful of red powder into the pot. In the cold season, there was nothing more enjoyable than eating a hot pot. Ever since Josiah popularized this method, hot pot immediately became popular in the encampment. However, the Gray Coat Army's resources were limited. Vegetables could be replaced by wild vegetables, but meat was difficult to find. This was also why David and the others immediately had a bad idea when they saw the horses in front of the encampment. As for why they had to choose Philip's carriage, it was because they had eaten this breed before, so they didn't hesitate to eat it. This is the taste, it's good. This horse meat is really good. David didn't care about the hot meat and commented as he swallowed. Well, after we finish eating, we'll go back and drag the rest of the horses here. Harry kept nodding, then rolled his eyes and suggested, we can consider this. I strongly agree. Tang In rubbed his forehead. Why did he feel like he had cultivated a bunch of bandits? Wow, this taste is very good. The people who were eating the horse meat turned their heads and saw a young man in luxurious clothes, twitching his nose and walking towards them. A noble? The people in the Gray Coat Army wearing this kind of attire were definitely the nobles who came to negotiate. Hi, everyone. My name is Philip. Philip introduced himself as if they were familiar with each other. His eyes were fixed on the boiling red soup. What is this? It looks delicious. Tang In touched his nose. This is hot pot. Hot pot? I've never heard of it, but the name is quite appropriate. After saying that, Philip didn't care about his luxurious clothes and casually sat on the ground beside Tang In. Where's the knife and fork? The members of the gray space looked at each other. David pursed his lips. Why should we give it to you? Don't be like that. I'm a guest after all. Philip spread his hands and smiled. There are many kinds of guests, and we don't welcome bad guests, Michaud said coldly. Philip shrugged his shoulders and said casually, even if you're a bad guest, you still have to give me a glass of water. Besides, even a criminal on the gallows will have a good meal. David grew impatient. You want to eat? Sure. Buy it with money, 1 piece of meat for 1 gold coin. Just as the brand officials said that the Gray Coat Army was a mob, the Gray Coat Army did not have a good impression of the nobles either. 1 gold coin for a piece of meat? This was obviously absurd. The rejection was obvious. However, Philip did not seem to think that this request was too much. He said straightforwardly, you should have said so earlier. This is what I should do. Are all nobles this rich? David suddenly had the urge to change 1 gold coin to 5 gold coins. In fact, David had underestimated the true value of the horse. This kind of purebred horse was priceless. Even if an ordinary noble wanted to buy it, they would not be able to find a way to do so. However, after Philip searched his pockets, he stretched out his empty hand and scratched his hair. Well, can I owe you first? I'll pay you back later. Of course, Philip was not short of money, but that did not mean that he had money on him. After all, it was the butler's job to pay the bill. You're bragging. If you don't have money, just say it. David sneered mercilessly. Oh, I got it. Philip pulled out the sapphire ring on his finger and handed it over. Can I pay with this? David took the ring and looked it over. You want to? Harry pulled him from behind, his eyes shining as he looked at the ring. His brain was working very quickly. Stone? This is a sapphire. Philip opened his mouth and said helplessly. Sapphire was one of the best diamonds in the world. With the color and purity of Philip's ring, coupled with the master-level craftsmanship of the ring, the market price was at least 50,000 gold coins. Isn't it just a stone? David pursed his lips, but after seeing Harry's anxious expression, he reluctantly nodded. All right, I'll take it as 5 gold coins. Heaven and earth could testify that to David, 5 gold coins was already a huge sum of money. Harry, who was good at calculating, was stunned. He then looked at David with admiration. You're ruthless. You're more suitable to be a profiteer than me. 5 gold coins? Come on, this is at least 50,000 gold coins. Philip was also shocked by David's domineering bargaining. He then said with dissatisfaction, 50,000? David opened his mouth wide and looked at him with disdain. You're insulting my intelligence. Damn. Tears streamed down Harry's face. He felt that his intelligence had been shattered to pieces. After a round of bargaining, the two finally reached a deal of 15 gold coins. Even then, David was still muttering that Philip had taken advantage of him. Seeing this, Tang and let out a long sigh. He thought to himself, should I let David manage the team's funds? On the other side, Philip finally got to eat the hot pot slices as he wished. Hot pot was very lethal to people who ate it for the first time. Philip was full of praise. Delicious, so refreshing. Now it's even better to have some wine, The iron pot was only so big. After a few people divided it, the slices of meat inside were quickly devoured. Where's the meat? Put more in. Philip, who was just addicted to eating, urged anxiously. What are you rushing for? You've already finished your 15 slices. David shook his head as he took a horse leg and sliced the meat. I didn't eat that much just now. Philip, who was trying to curry favor with David, suddenly froze. He pointed at the white horse leg and stammered, Ma, isn't a horse? Why don't you eat horse meat? That's my horse. Philip suddenly roared. The members of the gray space, including Tang Un, were all stunned. Damn, did they have to be so accurate? The victim's family came knocking on their door so quickly, and they just took someone else's horse and asked for money so openly. Philip stood up abruptly. His expression was unreadable. David and the others also stood up instantly. At this moment, 10 daggers slid into their sleeves. After all, their beloved horse was killed. No one knew if the other party would suddenly attack. Good kill. This is so delicious. It's so King worth it. If they were stunned just now, then Tang In and the others were completely dumbfounded. What kind of person was this? You guys sliced the meat. After saying this, Philip ran back. You're not allowed to eat secretly. I'll go get a bottle of wine. Philip was no longer doing his job. However, his role in the negotiation team was dispensable. So, in the afternoon, the negotiations still started as usual. After the adaptation and run-in in the morning, the negotiation at this time was the easiest to produce results. In fact, this was the case. In the afternoon, the preliminary draft was 70,000 kilograms of rice and 80,000 kilograms of flour, a total of 150,000 kilograms of grain. Of course, this was only a preliminary draft. Later on, there might be changes due to other conditions. But no matter what, this 100,000 kilograms of grain was almost in the Gray Coat Army's warehouse. Rosa and the others were satisfied with this result. In fact, their original goal was to get 100,000 kilograms. Now that there was suddenly so much more, they felt like they had been hit by a pie. As for the old nobles, their expressions were a little complicated. It was not because of the grain, but because of some people. Haha, now that the sky is dark, if you don't mind, you can stay for dinner before you leave. With such a result, Rosa was in a good mood and tried to persuade the other party to stay. Thank you, but there's no need. We'll leave after visiting the younger generation. That's not a problem. You've paid the visitation fee. Rosa agreed with a happy face. Visitation fee. The old noble's eyes twitched. They could not help but look at the cold Josiah behind them. Damn it, how did he come up with this idea? We've lived for so long, and we've never heard of visitation fee. Actually, the old nobles were very confident in the afternoon's negotiations. After all, they had experience. How could they lose to these country bumpkins? But soon, they realized that the pace of the negotiations was completely controlled by the other party. More accurately, it was controlled by a young man and a young woman. Their names were Josiah and Borg. The beautiful girl was as calm and sharp as her appearance. When the negotiations in the afternoon fell into a passive state, they were prepared to use their usual methods, such as avoiding the important points and dwelling on the trivial ones, or deliberately changing the topic to disrupt the other party's pace. For them, who often attended meetings, this was something they were very familiar with. Given a cup of tea, they could even talk nonstop for a few hours without repeating anything. Of course, there was no real content in it at all. But this time it did not work. Every time this happened, the girl who had been silent all this time would stand up and say a few words or directly point to the center of the topic, quickly leading the conversation back to the negotiations. This method was undoubtedly violent. If it was any other time, the negotiations would have collapsed long ago. But this negotiation was different. The other party held the absolute initiative. If it collapsed, they would be the ones to painfully repair the relationship in the end, and even pay the price for it. Moreover, this beautiful woman called Joshua had a very strange way of thinking. When they proposed to visit those unlucky juniors, she actually proposed a fee for visiting them. She even listed out a lot of reasons, such as protection, accommodation, food, and so on. In the end, they all felt that it would be unreasonable if they didn't pay her. After being disrupted a few times, the young man called Borg took advantage of the situation and listed all kinds of data in detail. In the end, the preliminary compensation of food was settled. The old nobles also realized where their problem was, and that was they did not pay enough attention to it. Originally, they had raised excuses such as the army's lack of supplies, the shortage of food in the north, and so on, but they were all rejected by Borg with all kinds of rigorous data. In the end, they were left speechless. With such a situation, it was obvious that the other party had been preparing for this negotiation for a long time. In contrast, they knew little about the situation of the Gray Coat Army. After the initial trump card of the bribe plan failed, they were completely in a passive state. The negotiation in the afternoon only lasted for a few hours, but it was definitely the most painful negotiation experience they had ever had. As if they were sitting on pins and needles, they could not remember how many times they took out handkerchiefs to wipe the sweat on their foreheads. When they came out of the tent and felt the cold night wind on their faces, they all felt a sense of relief. Yes, we're here. It's in there. Losha pointed at the only wooden house in the camp. Bolet touched the wooden board that was a few feet thick and looked at the wooden house that had no gaps except for a small window. He was furious. "Is this the accommodation you provided? This is a wild boar shack. Sir Bolet." Bolet's eyelids twitched as he saw the beautiful girl come out again. "It's cold in the north. The wild boar shack you mentioned can perfectly withstand any cold wind and maintain the temperature indoors." Josiah's mouth curved into a smile. "Besides, this is also for safety reasons. Oh, by the way, you still don't know. 3 days ago, a group of bandits with bad intentions broke in and even hurt the finger of a young noble. Therefore, we specially built this absolutely sturdy wooden house to ensure their safety." The few old nobles heard the girl's emphasis on the words, "you still don't know," and couldn't help but be speechless. Of course, they knew what those bandits with bad intentions were. Grandfather? Save me, grandfather. Uncle, I can't stand it anymore. Save me. Please. Say something. Hurry up and say something." Through the small window, the fearful and hideous faces of the young nobles or the pale faces of the weeping nobles appeared one after another. They really couldn't stand it anymore. The house was dark at all times except for the light that appeared when the 3 meals were delivered. No one interrogated, no one asked, even the person who delivered the meals didn't say a word. And because the house was so well sealed, there were no cockroaches, rats, ants. Nothing. Other than darkness, there was only darkness. Other than silence, there was only silence. Other than the heartbeat, everything here was frozen, even time. After being locked up here for 2 days, they racked their brains to reveal all their memories. They even revealed some of the indecent things they did when they climbed into the bed of their father's mistress. Without a doubt, this was Tang En's idea. Since he couldn't destroy their bodies, he could only change their minds. The old nobles couldn't understand the pain of being locked up. They only thought that these young nobles couldn't stand the humiliation, so they comforted them gently. However, the only response they got was a crazy roar. A moment later, smack! A soldier closed the wooden window expressionlessly, and all the noise disappeared. The old nobles were stunned. They still hadn't completely recovered from the deafening roar. They turned to look at Rosa, who shrugged and left without saying a word. They knew that the other party wouldn't open the wooden window again. Of course, unless they were willing to pay the exorbitant visiting fee. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 243. Bowing to thank book friends Moon Dota, JHD121, Brad in Heaven, and Otaku for their tips. Yes, and book friends Salted Fish in the Sun and Scarred Knight. Thank you all together. Carrot, dusk fell at the entrance of the station. You don't seem to have participated in the negotiations this afternoon. Negotiations are such an important thing. Of course, it has nothing to do with an idle person like me. Besides, with such delicious food, who would want to sit with those old men? Then what are you doing here? I came to hunt for beauties. Ahem, now I'm here to pursue the goddess. The two leaning on the mound and chatting were Tang, Un, and Philip. The members of the Gray Space had training in the afternoon, and Tangen was here to pick up little Carol. As for Philip, he looked to the east from time to time, as if he was waiting for someone. It had to be said that there were some people in the world who were hard to hate, even if they were in a different position. For example, the aristocrat Josiah, who had a very strong affinity, and the aristocrat Philip, who was lying on the mound without a care for his image. His posture of tasting tea was very elegant. At the same time, he was also very straightforward when he drank with others, even if the wine stains on his luxurious clothes. He could look at the dark night sky in front of him and sing the opera with 3 sighs. He could also get together with others, winking and saying vulgar words, Tang, and had no ill feelings toward Philip, but David and the others, who had been oppressed by the aristocrats since they were young, ended up with him in the end, holding wine bottles and howling at Skywolf. Tang, I want to ask you about someone. Philip took away the wine bottle and leaned over mysteriously. Tangen was surprised. Oh, of course, it's the beautiful goddess Josiah. Philip narrowed his eyes, as if recalling the amazement of their first encounter, and then said, I heard from David that you are very familiar with her. This is indeed familiar. Uh-huh. Philip suddenly perked up. Then do you know her preferences, such as what she likes to eat? What kind of clothes does she like to wear? What kind of people does she like? Also, what is her personality like? She... Stop, Tang, and touched his forehead. Even though he was calm, he was almost confused by these questions. Why are you asking? Of course I'm going after her. Philip waved his arms exaggeratedly and gestured. Oh, you don't even know how I felt when I first saw her. That perfect nose, perfect eyes. In short, everything was perfect. Well, the most important thing was that she had this temperament. Oh, she was as cold as an iceberg. But I can tell that this isn't her usual self. Do you know what this means? Oh, what does that mean? Tang had moved back a little, wanted to distance himself from this slightly fanatical, crazy guy. When I was young, I always had a dream, which was to marry all the beauties in the world. Philip clenched his fist to show his determination. But later, I realized that it was a little unrealistic. It's not that I can't do it, but it's too troublesome. So I changed my dream. I want to have an unforgettable encounter with all the beauties in the world. I've been working hard to practice it until I met Josiah. She can change her temperament to be so perfect, and she's still so young. Doesn't that mean that she can become any charming, cute, innocent, or sexy beauty in the future? Haha, if I marry her, won't I be able to fulfill my dream? I can now answer your previous question with certainty and certainty. Tang patted Philip's shoulder. This means that you're being carried away by lust. Lust? What kind of lust is that? Philip asked, puzzled. Anyway, you have to help me. Philip grabbed Tang's shoulder and said excitedly, I've been waiting for her for 78 years. At that moment, Tang felt that there was something wrong with his ears. 78 years? Plus my mother's age. This isn't important. The key is that this has always been my dream. Philip stared at Tang with bright eyes. As my good friend, do you really have the heart to watch me fail to realize my dreams? Ahem, our relationship doesn't seem to be that good. Philip waved his hand indifferently. Believe me, when I saw you, I knew that we would be friends for life. It doesn't matter if I give you an advance now. Tang sighed. Believe me this time. You're really drunk. It seems that my guess is right. Philip suddenly touched his chin and looked Tang up and down. It seems that you also like Josiah, so you didn't tell me this. No need to explain. This is normal. Philip patted Tang's shoulder, who was speechless and smiling bitterly. It's normal for you to like a perfect goddess like Josiah. Those who don't like are old men who can't get hard and can only be illusions. Philip's tone suddenly changed, and his face suddenly became sad. But you cannot support me because of this. You obviously have no chance now. I'm not saying that you're not handsome. You're just not that handsome. I've praised you so much, and you still don't want to say it? You should at least give me the right to compete fairly. It's not my fault that I'm handsome. Damn you, you'll give me a chance to speak. Tang looked at Philip, whose eyes were wide open and full of expectation. He only felt that his brain was about to explode. It was as if there were 1,000 flies buzzing around his ears. He really wanted to slap them to death. Just when Tang was thinking that maybe knocking Philip out was an option, he suddenly heard a conversation behind him. Looking back, Tang was overjoyed. Hey, your people are here. See you tomorrow. I won't send you off. What the F***? This fly can finally leave. Behind him was the noble negotiation team, as well as Rosa and the others who were sending him off. Suddenly, Philip spread out his hands and said doubtfully, Who said I'm leaving? Tang was stunned. He touched his hair and said, You're not leaving. What do you mean? Philip said matter-of-factly, If I leave, how can I pursue the goddess? I've decided to stay here. At noon, I'll send the guards back to get the things. Stay here. Tang was dumbfounded. Yes, they're finally here. Philip suddenly jumped on the mound and looked to the east. These idiots, they're taking so long to get the things. Tang looked up and saw that in the distance, in the twilight, several carriages full of large objects were moving towards them. Philip jumped down from the mound and ran towards the old noble. "Hey, Josiah, long time no see." "Haha. Sir Bullet, how's the negotiation going? I don't want to say this, but since it's already like this, let's be straightforward. Give what you need. Don't be so stingy." Rosa and the others were stunned. They looked at Philip, who was running towards them with a bottle of wine. "What's going on? Is there a traitor among them?" As for the old nobles, they were speechless. Their faces were gloomy, and they turned to get on the carriage. "Oh, right." Philip slapped his head and said, "I forgot to tell you that I'll be staying here from now on." The old nobles froze in their movements. After a while, the fat noble said uncertainly, "What are you talking about? Can't you hear that? Sigh, I pity you for being so old." Philip shook his head and repeated, "I said I'll be staying here from now on." "What? Nonsense. Sir Philip, do you know what you're doing?" The old nobles finally reacted. What followed was an uproar of condemnation. The Brand government had always been firm about the position of the Gray Coat Army. It was a group of rebels and bandits. If they encountered them, they would be eliminated immediately. Therefore, no matter which noble it was, they would avoid them, fearing that they would cause trouble. But now, this womanizer was going to stay here. "All right, your identity is a little special, but you're a member of the negotiation team. At least you have to be careful of the consequences. Sir Philip, you're violating the laws of the Empire," Bullet said sternly. Philip spread his hands and said, "Is there a law that says I can't live with the Gray Coat Army?" The old nobles were stunned. Of course, there was no such law. The law could not be so specific. "All right, my things are here. See you tomorrow, everyone." Philip casually said this and walked forward. At this time, the crowd realized that there were a bunch of carriages parked outside the camp. There were tents, cutlery, clothes. It looked like they were going on an excursion. At this time, Philip suddenly remembered something. He turned around and walked past the crowd to Josiah. He bowed elegantly and said, "Beautiful Miss Josiah, please allow me to formally introduce myself to you again. My name is Philip. Oh, and also, you look exactly like my future wife." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 244. The basic ways to use the scythe are to swipe, hook, swing, smash. This kind of light attack is just right for your age, but because this method is a bit strange, it pays a lot of attention to the coordination of body movements. You should increase your speed training in the future. When you start practicing with the sickle, you must call for your brother to be by your side because it's easy to hurt yourself. Take it slow and don't rush. This isn't something that can be done overnight. Well, I'll teach you something else first. You know that Big Brother Tang is an assassin, so I might teach you in that direction. You have to be mentally prepared. Not afraid. It's not a matter of whether you're scared or not. Well, you're still young, so you can't compare to adults in terms of strength and skills. But sometimes, you don't need to rely on these to kill people. You have to find a way to use your own advantages. No one will be wary of a weak little girl. You have to make good use of this. Inside the tent, under the dim yellow light, Tang was teaching little Carol something, and the latter kept nodding. If one were to look at it from afar, he believed that many people would think that this was a heartwarming scene between siblings. Since he had decided to teach little Carol, Tang naturally wouldn't be careless. What was mentioned above was the old butler's and his own combat skills and experiences. Tang was a little puzzled by the old butler's explanation, because the old butler seemed to have taught the little girl before. He had considered everything in this aspect. Of course, Tang also knew that he would not be able to get anything out of the old butler. After all, he did not treat the old butler as an intelligent NPC. The old butler was still very optimistic about little Carol. It wasn't because he saw any unique talent in her, but because of her personality. One time, when Tang entered the space, he saw the old butler admiring the scene of little Carol silently waving her scythe and slowly torturing her enemy to death on the light screen. That's right, it was admiration. Her expressionless face was actually full of gratification, which made Tang feel a chill. The scythe that little Carol was holding was still the giant one. Tangan didn't plan to make a new one for her for the time being, because it was just right for her to carry it for training. Right now, Tangan was teaching little Carol how to act. Cute, pitiful, as cute as a piece of white paper, pitiful blankness. Men would more or less like this. Little Carol, on the other hand, was quite talented in performing and was never tired of this practice. This made Tangan feel as if he could already see a little girl standing at the intersection of the street, looking at the vast sea of people and rolling traffic with a face full of confusion and fear. At this time, a man walked over, squatted down, and asked in a gentle voice. But unexpectedly, a cold light flashed across his throat in an instant. "TSK, TSK. I'm really looking forward to it." Tangan pursed his lips and smiled. With this kind of training, it was soon late at night. At this moment, "Boss," a low voice came from outside the tent. Looking at the thin figure reflected on the cloth, Michaud seemed to be the only member of the gray space who fit the description. Tangan grabbed a set of black clothes and lowered his head. "Carol, that's all for today. Big brother has to go out for a while. Wash up and rest first." Okay." Little Carl nodded obediently. She wasn't curious enough to ask what it was. Tangan nodded and lifted the curtain. Michaud, who was outside, was dressed in black and holding a dark cloth bag in his hand. "Boss, I found out the location. It's 3 kilometers north of the encampment. Let's go and take a look." In the middle of the night, the two of them were dressed like this. Naturally, they wouldn't do anything good. Of course, there was a sentry in the north of the encampment. Tangan and Michaud didn't pass by openly. Instead, they took a detour and sneaked out from the side. Michaud could be said to have made the most progress among this group of gray space members. Under Tangan's teachings, he was now a qualified assassin except for his weak Do Chi. Therefore, this kind of secret breakthrough from the inside out was very easy for him. After leaving the encampment, the two of them ran at full speed. In a few minutes, they stopped in front of an inconspicuous mound of dirt. "It's here." Michaud opened the bag. Inside were 2 small iron shovels and a bronze oil lamp. Then the two of them waved their shovels and dug the mound without saying a word. After digging about half a meter deep, Tangan shoveled down. Ding, brushing aside the dirt, a white stone tablet was revealed. Michaud took the oil lamp from the side. The words on the stone tablet were very simple. The word bollard was written, and below it was engraved a roaring lion with wings. That was the symbol of the Elvis family. "TSK, TSK, quite particular." Tangan curled his lips. After the people of the Gray Coat Army died, they usually simply dug a hole and buried them. They didn't erect any stone tablets. It wasn't that they didn't respect it, but because it was a special time now, they were worried that the Legion soldiers would destroy them to vent their anger and disturb the rest of the souls. But the tomb in front of them was ingenious. The stone tablet was buried under it. Seeing the stone tablet, the coffin was naturally close. After a while, Tangan cleaned up the entire coffin and opened the yellow wooden cover. Bang! Tangan immediately frowned. Through the light of the fire, there were only a few large gray rocks in the coffin. The dead wouldn't walk on their own, and it was even more impossible for them to rot. There was only one explanation for this situation, and that was that Bollard wasn't buried here at all. Michaud's face changed. "Boss, I got the news from the soldiers who carried the coffin. It's not your fault. The news is true." Shaking his head, Tangan narrowed his eyes. Someone did something in advance. But this also shows that there is indeed a problem. Tangan didn't believe that Bollard had suddenly committed suicide. After seeing Board's reaction a few days ago, he was even more certain in his heart. But everything had to be seen, so he came here today to dig up the tomb, hoping to find some clues. But now that Bollard's body wasn't here, it meant that someone had considered that Tangan would come to investigate. This also indirectly confirmed that Bollard's death was indeed strange. Of course, if the other party dared to hide the body to cut off the hidden danger, there was no need to worry about exposing anything. After all, there were so many soldiers who testified that Bollard was indeed buried here. Michaud obviously thought of this and said coldly, Boss, should we kill? Kill? Who do you want to kill? Tangan asked. Michaud was silent. Now they only knew that Ballard did intend to fake the task, but no one was sure if there was anyone else involved in this matter. Tang In suspected Borg. After all, he was the only connection between Ballard and himself. But it was obviously inappropriate to kill just based on suspicion. Let's bury it first. Tang In jumped out of the pit. Since we have already exposed our claws, we are not afraid that he will stop. We will find an opportunity. Okay. Michaud nodded and pushed the soil down with a shovel. About half an hour later, Tang In and Michaud tidied up their clothes, greeted the guards, and entered through the main door. Sometimes there was training in the gray space at night, so they didn't arouse suspicion when they came in. After walking for a while, Tang In suddenly stopped. Michaud, how's your practice of the tide fighting power? Currently, I am a high-level trainee warrior. Michaud was startled and quickly answered. Well, not bad. Tang In nodded with satisfaction. Trainee warriors were undoubtedly weak. They were at the lowest level of the fighting power level. However, Michaud had only been practicing for a few months. If he could achieve such a result, he would definitely be regarded as a martial arts genius. From tomorrow onwards, you are responsible for teaching the tide fighting technique to each of your brothers. Well, I will also teach you the fighting power circulation channel that I gave you before. Currently, the strength of the members of the gray space had reached a bottleneck. Their strength and speed were increasing slowly. Of course, this was not because they had exhausted their potential, but because they didn't have the corresponding fighting power to assist them. After half a month of being hunted, Tang In had confirmed everyone's loyalty. Therefore, he decided to pass down the ocean tide mantra and the combat energy channel that Grimace had discovered. Okay. Michaud suppressed his shock and agreed. Michaud didn't care about the fighting power circulation channel. He was shocked by the fighting power circulation channel. Although Tang In didn't explain the use of the channel, Michaud vaguely felt that it seemed to be able to increase the speed of fighting power cultivation. He himself was a good example. Before his business family was robbed by bandits, the mercenaries he hired were all close to middle age, but their fighting power was only at the beginner level. Michaud had only practiced for a few months, and he was about to reach this level. Also, I am planning to expand the size of the gray space. Well, this time, I will recruit about 30 people. Before Michaud could recover from his shock, Tang In continued. When there are more people, the relationship of power and responsibility will have to be clarified. So, I have decided to let you and David lead 15 people each. You will be divided into the Green Dragon team and the White Tiger team. This was Tang In's idea for a long time. The Gray Space team needed to be small and strong, with a dozen people in a team. They would be able to attack, cover, collect information, and make attack plans. Finally, they would be able to fight independently. As for why they were divided into two teams now, it was because of the competition between the two teams. I won't let you down, boss. Michaud's expression changed a few times, and he said firmly, letting them lead the team meant that in the future, they would have the highest status in the gray space besides Tang In. This was an honor, but also a pressure. Tang In patted Michaud's shoulder and said, well, let's call it a night. By the way, tell the brothers to pay attention to anything related to the Elvis family in the future. Elvis was the name of the Borg family. Chapter 12 of The Northern Wind and Cloud mentioned it. Okay, got it. Huh. Tang In and Michaud turned their heads at the same time and looked to the east of the camp. The omnipresent night wind in the north was still whistling, but this time, in addition to the cold, there was also a whining sound. After listening for a while, the sound gradually became clearer. It sounded like some kind of string instrument, and it was very melodious. This, Tang In and Michaud looked at each other. Was there such an instrument in the camp? There were still people in the Gray Coat Army who knew how to play instruments. Of course, nobles like Josiah knew how to play. Other than that, only some old people would study it in their free time. However, there weren't many instruments here, and the old people only studied simple pipes made of bamboo. Let's go and take a look. Tang In called out and ran over there first. The sound came very suddenly. The camp had just been attacked a few days ago, so naturally, it was a little worrying. The music continued to sound, and the performance of the person was obviously not low. Even a music illiterate like Tang and could hear a lingering feeling from it. However, gradually there were some noises around them. Adults were cursing, children were crying, and so on. That's right, the music was indeed good. Normally, everyone would be intoxicated by it. But now, it was nighttime, and it was clearly disturbing people's dreams. When Tang In and Michaud arrived at the scene of the incident, the music stopped abruptly, and what followed next seemed to be a clamor. "Brother, wait, brother, my chapter of the Goddess of Love is about to reach its climax. Let me play a little more, just a little more. Josiah, I love." "Ouch, don't push me, Tang, and opened his mouth and saw Joshua standing in front of the tent. His face was full of shame, anger, and helplessness. In the open space in front, two soldiers were constantly entangled with a man with a violin in his hand. The man was waving his bow as he struggled to squeeze forward. He looked a little disheveled. Through the light of the fire, Tang and could see the man's appearance clearly. He had brown curly hair and a charming face. "This is Philip?" Michaud was stunned. After all, they had eaten and drank together for half an afternoon, and Michaud still remembered this maverick nobleman. Thinking about how Philip had asked him about Josiah's address, Tang In touched his forehead. What a fast move. Is this guy going to confess his love to a violin? In the evening, at the entrance of the encampment, the group of old nobles knew that this womanizer would definitely not leave after seeing Philip confess to Joshua in public. They had no choice but to leave behind a few harsh words before boarding the carriage and leaving. Rosa and the others were also a little troubled by this guy who was willing to stay here. Although he was a noble, there was no reason to lock him up with a group of young noblemen now that the war was over. However, it was obviously inappropriate to let him stay in the camp like this. The example of the teleportation circle a few days ago was still there. It was too dangerous to let him set up a tent randomly. At this time, the members of the Gray Space came back from their training. David even greeted Philip. Seeing this, Rosa simply let Philip stay with David and the others. This solved the problem of accommodation and also made it easier to monitor. "Ah, Brother Tang In, you came at the right time. Quick, help me." Philip saw Tang In on the mound and hurriedly called out to him. The two soldiers below looked up and hesitated when they saw Tang In. Now, Tang In and the Gray Space's name had spread throughout the camp. Of course, because of some people's manipulation in the dark, the reviews were mixed. However, one thing was certain. The captain of the Gray Space, Tang In, was not only mysterious, but also had a bad temper. Tang In touched his nose and waved at Josiah. "Good night." After that, he turned around and left. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 245. After the first day's initial contact, the negotiations were on the right track. The group of old nobles no longer dared to look down on these country bumpkins. When they came to negotiate the next day, almost everyone had dark circles under their eyes. It was obvious that they had gone back last night to collect the relevant information and discuss the strategy. So, for both sides, it was a test of patience. Tang In had little interest in the negotiations, and there was no need to use any tricks in the current situation. So, he began to officially expand the size of the Gray Space. "Boss, do you want to put it up here?" David held up a large wooden sign and looked around. Tang In nodded. It was not far from the place where the negotiations would take place. It was in the middle of the station. "Okay." David thrust the wooden sign in the ground, then hit it with his palms until it was completely nailed. Tang In took 2 steps back to take a look and stroked his chin in satisfaction. Compared to the exaggerated signboard last time, the notice this time was very concise. "The Gray Space is recruiting." 6 large words took up most of the wooden sign, and below it was an arrow pointing to the south. "Let's go and see how Michaud is doing." Tang In patted the sign and walked to the south. Boss, David said, scratching his head. Michaud said, this morning that you want me to lead a team? Yes, Tang In nodded. Half of the people recruited this time are yours. David looked a little hesitant. Boss, how about we let Michaud lead them all? I don't know anything, so I'll follow you. If you don't know anything, then learn. Tang In shook his head. The gray space team will grow bigger and bigger, and Michaud and I won't be able to lead it alone. And not only do you have to lead them, but you also have to lead them well, because one of them is likely to lead the next team. But David rubbed his hands together, still not confident. Tang In patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, I'll continue to lead you for a while. Besides, you just need to lead the attack. You can leave the details to your subordinates. All right. David nodded when he saw Tang In's determination. Tang In chuckled. He knew that David had reluctantly agreed. However, one would get used to the role of a leader after becoming one. No matter how small the power was, it was still power. After experiencing it, one would rely on it. David was the first to follow him, and his strength was also the highest. If he didn't take the position, who would? Even if David's brain was special and he had no feelings for power, a leader represented not only power, but also glory. People in this world still valued this very much. As he spoke, Tang In suddenly stopped in his tracks. About a few dozen meters ahead, Philip was squatting in front of a little girl with a bright candy in his hand. He was talking to her with a smile on his face. The little girl bit her finger and looked at the candy hopefully. She nodded hesitantly. Tang In's mind was confused for a moment. Why was this scene so familiar? Wasn't this the classic trick of a strange uncle to trick a little girl? However, Tang In soon knew that he had misunderstood. After the little girl tilted her head and said a few words, Philip happily touched her hair, handed over the candy, and stood up. The little girl cheered excitedly and jumped to the side. David's thoughts were, of course, not so evil. He just walked over in big strides. Philip, what are you doing here? Philip, who was taking out a piece of paper to record something, looked up in surprise. David, good, you disloyal guy is here too. The last sentence was said to Tang In through gritted teeth. The reason was, of course, that he failed to woo Tang In last night. He called for Tang In's help, but was decisively ignored. Didn't you say that I'm a competitor? Then why should I help you? Tang In walked over with his mouth twitched. Brother, you're just here to participate. Philip straightened his back and said confidently, so friendship naturally comes first. What's more, you ate my food, so of course you have to help me. Tang In touched his nose. Although he was not very interested in the phrase priority is to participate, the recent 2 meals had become very sumptuous because of Philip's participation. The food that Philip ate was still sent over from the army. Although there were very few delicacies due to the limited conditions, there was still some fresh meat. What are you doing? Tang In pointed at the small notebook in Philip's hand and changed the topic. His observation was very sharp. With a quick glance, he saw some strange words such as peace, kindness, and good to me. When Philip saw that Tang In noticed this, he immediately perked up. Kid, I'll teach you a trick today. Chasing after a beauty is also a kind of knowledge. He waved the small notebook and continued. This is the information about Josiah that I've been collecting since this morning. There are already a few hundred pieces of information. Tang In opened his mouth and was completely shocked. This kid really put in a lot of effort to pick up girls. Oh, did you see anything? Philip touched his chin and looked at Tang In again. There's no harm in telling you. Anyway, your threat is almost non-existent. First, we have to know. Josiah is a beauty. Isn't that nonsense? David scratched his head. Wait for me to finish. Philip rolled his eyes and continued. As long as it's a beauty, she will receive a lot of appreciation and praise. So, purely praising her appearance is not enough to get a good impression. At this time, they want people to pay attention to things other than their appearance. My judgment yesterday was right. Josiah is not born cold. In fact, she has a very kind personality and is very caring. Oh, I can't help it when I think about it. Get to the point. Philip glared at Tang Yin. Okay, so putting an effort on her is a thankless task. What I want to do is to let her know that I'm also a kind and caring person. Haha, so I've decided. From now on, I'll help everyone here. You want to help the Gray Code Army negotiate? Tang Yin was surprised. It had to be said that Philip's method was very reliable. Josiah was very kind to the commoners. Her purpose of joining the Gray Coat Army was to raise the status of the commoners. So, if she saw someone trying to help the Gray Coat Army, it would definitely win her favor. Ahem, not that. I'm here in the name of a negotiation team. Wouldn't it be betrayal if I did that? Philip cleared his throat awkwardly. I want to help the commoners. Well, I've already thought of a specific method. TSK. Tang Yin, you don't have a chance. After saying this confidently, Philip turned around and left with his head held high. Tang Un and David looked at each other. The latter licked his lips and clenched his fist. Boss, isn't this guy asking for a beating? How about I cripple him so that he won't dare to peep at Miss Josiah again? You have nothing better to do. Huh? Tang Un raised his eyebrows and turned to look at David. You've learned how to get information out of me. David suddenly panicked and waved his hands. No. You understood what I said just now? How dare you say no? Well, boss, I'll go find Michaud first. David retreated in a panic and quickly ran to the south. Tang In curled his lips and then looked at Philip, who was still standing straight. He shook his head and suppressed the slight fluctuation in his heart. The wooden sign of the Gray Space's recruitment was quickly discovered, and then the news kept spreading among the crowd. Although the Gray Space had mixed reviews, the contributions they had made recently were solid. Think about the words hero, glory, and so on the first sign. Those who thought that it was exaggerated before had to admit that the Gray Space had now become the heroes of the Gray Coat Army. The title of hero was a great temptation for young people. So, some people quickly gathered in the south of the station. As time went by, the crowd became denser and denser. Eventually, it became a grand occasion where all the believers gathered in the church to participate in a prayer meeting on Sunday. Although Tang Un had already expected this, the real situation was still far beyond his expectations. The 10 or so members of the Gray Space went into battle together, but they were also flustered. Tang Un had only intended to recruit 30 people, but he had actually reserved a quota of 100 people. The extra could be slowly eliminated over the next 3 days. Because of the previous experience, Tang In and the others gradually became organized after a short period of panic. The recruitment work lasted for a day. In the morning, Tang In and the others had selected about 70 people. Phew! Although the weather was cold, David wiped the sweat off his face. There are too many people. That's right. Because he was fat, Harry sweated even more. He didn't even have time to wipe it off. Let's take a break and have lunch. We'll continue in the afternoon, Tang In said to the crowd calmly. Too many people? Thinking back to the time when he had graduated and rushed into the recruitment site, the scene was filled with gongs and drums, firecrackers, red flags, and a sea of people. Everyone packed up a little and walked to the center of the station. But after a few minutes, they were stunned. The densely packed commoners in front of them had completely blocked off the path. There were even more people who had climbed up the mounds and shakily walked forward. Compared to this scene, the people who had gathered in the Gray Space before paled in comparison. David looked at the scene in front of him and touched his hair. Is there a recruitment today? No. Michaud pointed to the crowd carefully. Most of the people here are uncles and aunties. How can it be a recruitment? Michaud was right. The sea of people in front of them were mainly old people. Some of them were holding wooden basins filled with dirty clothes. I'll go and ask around. Harry walked quickly to the crowd and said something to a few aunties. He nodded and walked back. It's Philip's doing, Harry said. It seems that he has something that can wash clothes automatically. Don't look at me like that. That's what the aunties said. David was shocked. Wash clothes automatically? How is that possible? Tang In's heart skipped a beat. He jumped up and jumped inside. He found a small foothold and landed. Then, like a fish swimming in the sea of people, he quickly slid in. The members of the gray space behind him opened their mouths and looked at him with admiration. They could only watch from the periphery. There was no way they could cut into such a dense crowd. After a while, Tang reached the innermost part. He saw that everyone around him was staring at the automatic barrel machine in front of them with either surprise or fear in their eyes. The flowing water in the bucket caused a few pieces of clothing to be entangled together, floating up and down. There's no need to waste any effort, and you don't have to worry about your hands being frozen by the cold water. Everyone, bring your dirty clothes over. We'll wash them clean in a few minutes. Hey kid, don't pull it. That's a logo. Philip stopped the naughty child from pulling the kitten logo on the washing machine and shouted at the crowd. What the heck? Tang looked at the machine in front of him with a complicated expression. He felt like he was traveling through time. His memories were also pulled back to Lion City, Lena, Alan. This was the washing machine that Tang had suggested as a joke and Lena had invented. Yes, it was a raccoon brand. The washing machine in front of him was no longer a simple assembly. It was a complete barrel. It was similar to the ones in the modern world. Lena, you finally improved it. Alan, you finally succeeded. Depressing. I went back to my hometown for peace and quiet. But this constant power outage is really giving me a headache. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 246. The Gray Space was recruiting. Philip's automatic washing machine. On this day, the Greycoat Army's base was bustling with activity because of these two things. Of course, in terms of attractiveness, the latter was undoubtedly more attractive. This was almost a reversal of the way people thought. Clothes, of course, had to be washed by hand. This was the consensus of the otherworldly people for thousands of years. However, after seeing the automatic washing machine to remove the dirt from clothes, this consensus was broken. This was an epic-making alchemy item. This was the evaluation that Philip relayed to Tang Yin. According to Philip, he bought this washing machine at an auction house in the capital of Bran. At that time, there was only one of it. Later, there was a continuous stream of business groups shipping this item. Soon, almost every wealthy family in the city had one. The difference was that the public used the cheaper version. The appearance was not as exquisite and did not have a dehydrating function. The aristocrats used precious materials and could quickly dehydrate. During that time, the washing machine was almost synonymous with fashion in the imperial capital. If the aristocrats did not have one, they would be too embarrassed to attend gatherings because they would talk about this item. Therefore, the origin of the washing machine was soon spread. It was said that it was invented by a business group called Yatong in a small city in the south. Because of this, the business group quickly accumulated wealth and became one of the most famous business groups in the country. Of course, the commotion in the base also alerted Rosa and the others who had just walked out of the tent. Philip also got what he wanted and received Josiah's gratitude. Because of this, the former was in a state of madness for almost the entire afternoon. That arrogant look made David and the others wonder if they should find time to put a sack on this guy and drag him to a remote corner to beat him up to cool him down. The Greycoat Army's interest in the washing machine did not die down so quickly. In the next few days, the news in the base was almost all about this topic. Until one afternoon, the washing machine emitted an abnormal ear-piercing sound and then completely stopped spinning. The Annie who was using it was frightened by the noise. Philip, who came later, checked it and helplessly announced that the washing machine was broken. Of course, the washing machine would not be broken so easily. Moreover, Philip's was a high-end product. However, no matter how advanced it was, it couldn't be used endlessly. One had to know that for the past few days, the citizens of the Greycoat Army had almost never stopped the washing machine from spinning. As the crowd lamented, the washing machine was towed away by the carriage that Philip had called. It was said that there were several opportunities for free repair for such a high-quality product. In these few quiet days, the Gray Space team completed the elimination of members and officially recruited 30 members. Following that, Tangan carried out the training without stopping. He dragged the 30 people into the wilderness outside the encampment. As a result, the citizens of the Gray Coat Army could hear terrifying screams coming from afar from time to time. Needless to say, Tangan's image was once again blackened. Luo Sha and the others were also having a difficult time negotiating. Food and other things were easy to confirm. Cotton and cloth were also easy to negotiate. However, armors and weapons were very sensitive, so the process was extremely slow. However, none of this could stop the emergence of a new topic, Josiah and Borg. In the beginning, it seemed that someone had accidentally overheard the old nobles mumbling that if it weren't for the two of them, the losses in the negotiation would have been reduced by at least half. As the rumors gradually spread, the losses that had been reduced by half became half, and then it became more than half. The rumors became more and more exaggerated. The two names, Josiah and Borg, became more and more important in the hearts of the citizens of the Gray Coat Army. In the end, it seemed that the negotiation was a confrontation between Josiah and Borg and the old nobles. Of course, that was not the case. However, Luo Sha and the others were collectively silent. Even when Luo Sha was chatting with others, he was still praising Josiah and Borg. After that, it was as if there was an invisible hand manipulating the rumors about the two of them. Every highlight of the negotiation was quickly spread and magnified. The two stars of the Gray Coat Army. No one knew who was the first to call them that, but it quickly spread among the citizens. Among them, Josiah received the most praise. Her rumors were also the most widespread. Things like forcefully interrupting the other party's delay, sharply pointing out the flaws in the trap, and so on. In addition to her original good image, it didn't take long for Josiah to have a unique nickname. Little Luo Sha? Luo Sha had the highest position in the hearts of the Gray Coat Army people. Whether it was the bravery she had stood up when the Gray Coat Army was on the verge of disbandment at the beginning, or the successful breakout of every encirclement and suppression that she had led everyone to have a clear idea in their hearts. The Gray Coat Army could do without anyone, but it could not do without Luo Sha. Now that Josiah had received the title of Little Luo Sha, it was undoubtedly a very high evaluation and honor. It could be said that as the negotiation continued to drag on, Josiah and Borg's reputation gradually grew. However, Josiah, as the person involved, did not feel anything. She was now worried about the progress of the negotiations with the armor, weapons, and military equipment all day long. She did not have the time or energy to pay attention to these things at all. Occasionally, she would wonder why the way everyone looked at her was getting weirder and weirder. Josiah had once taken the time to ask Tang In, but regarding this, Tang In did not have any good ideas. These armaments were taboo. Even when the nobles raised their private armies, they would be secretive about these things. However, the stalemate between the two sides did not last long. Soon, the negotiation team of the nobles made a small concession, and it was perfectly resolved. Of course, this was not because the other party could not withstand the pressure, but because she had come to the army camp alone, at night, in the army camp's big tent. The three great generals, Ralph, Barlow, and Gary, were once again gathered together. General Gary, how did the negotiation go today? Barlow asked lazily as soon as he came in and sat down. The three great generals took turns to bring the old nobles to the Gray Coat Army camp every day. Today, it was Gary's turn. They did not have the right to participate in the negotiation. Every day, they simply brought people over and then sat silently at the side to watch the two sides argue. It's still the same. Gary's eyelids drooped, and his tone was calm. However, because he was born with a gloomy face, when he said this, he seemed to be gloomy. The Gray Coat Army is really daring. They dare to ask for so much military equipment. What can we do? After all, they have hostages in their hands. Barlow changed his position and reclined on the chair. He seemed to be very listless. I've had enough of this *TTY life. I feel like my bones are going to rust. Ralph and Gary nodded when they heard this. They seemed to agree with Barlow's words. Originally, they were the elite troops of their respective armies. They were located at the border. Because of the occasional sneak attacks by the barbarians in the northern wilderness, there were battles almost every day. However, now that they had fallen into such an awkward situation, it was natural that their lives were very boring. After a moment of silence, Barlow suddenly said, "That's right. Have you guys noticed that a small team of the Gray Coat Army has been training in the wilderness recently?" Gary frowned. "It's the group of people who run outside the camp every morning, right?" "That's right. It's them." Barlow nodded and leaned forward. He finally showed some vitality. "You don't say. I've observed them for a while. Their daily training is quite interesting. These people were all generals on the battlefield. Naturally, they had good eyesight. Even though they could not completely understand what Tang Yin was doing, they could still acutely sense that the other party's training was a little unique. They are very powerful," Ralph commented. He was a man of few words. Barlow nodded. "Of course. After all, they captured that group of nobles and forced their way through our tens of thousands of soldiers. It's not that." Ralph shook his head. "HM?" Both Barlow and Gary turned their heads at the same time and looked at Ralph in confusion. At this moment, the latter sank into silence. It was as if he was considering how to say it. This expressionless face. Both Barlow and Gary could not help but criticize silently. They looked at the deputy general behind Ralph. "Cough, cough. It's like this." The middle-aged deputy general bowed simply and continued. "When the scouts of our army were doing a routine check of the surroundings, they discovered a small team of the Gray Coat Army. They were climbing up the mountain wall in the south with their bare hands. They seemed to be in a competition. There were about 5 people in a group. The height of the climb was about 100 meters. The mountain wall in the south can be climbed?" Barlow and Gary were shocked. Of course, they knew what was going on over there. It could be said that the mountain wall was straight up and down like a mirror. The difficulty of climbing on this mountain wall was self-evident. According to the scout's report, at that time, he saw a person who seemed to be doing a demonstration. He climbed up in an extremely short amount of time. He did not use any battle energy, nor did he use any lifting techniques. He relied on the slightly protruding parts of the mountain and climbed up step by step. This, Barlow and Gary looked at each other. Then Barlow said they should be training scouts. "Does this mean that they are part of the Gray Coat Army scout team?" The middle-aged deputy general shook his head. "That's not all. Our scouts also discovered some human-shaped targets at that height. After they climbed to that height, not only did they need to stabilize their bodies, they also needed to rapidly stab at the targets." Barlow touched his chin. "If you put it this way, this seems like an ambush team. However, with so few people, can they form a fighting force?" As expected of a general, Barlow could see the problem at a glance. In an army battle, sending troops to ambush was considered a normal tactic. Every army had a troop type, such as light cavalry, that was specially used for this. However, without exception, these teams were all organized. At the very least, they had to be of the size of a large team in order to achieve the desired effect. If there were only a few dozen people, even if the ambush was successful, what difference would there be in a battle? "Yes," Ralph suddenly spoke. "They have captured hostages." Barlow was stunned. Then he smiled and said, "This is an accident." Speaking up to this point, Barlow suddenly frowned. "General Ralph, are you saying that this group of people is specially used to appear at crucial points in the battle and then give a fatal blow? For example, assassinating the main general?" Ralph nodded slightly. This is a little too presumptuous. Since when can assassins enter the battlefield?" Barlow could not help but laugh. Gary, who was beside him, also twitched his mouth in disbelief. It was no wonder that their expressions were a little frivolous. In their minds, or rather, in the minds of all the generals, war was a confrontation between two armies. Under such a situation, a small disturbance caused by a certain person could suddenly occur. It was just like when did you see an ant biting an elephant to death? Ralph did not refute this. He remained silent out of habit. What happened after that? What did that group of people do after that? Barlow asked with interest. Cough, cough. The middle-aged deputy general's expression was a little awkward. After that, our scouts were discovered and chased away. Barlow and Gary opened their mouths wide. Their eyes were wide open. What? Of course, they knew the combat power of the Zechen Legion scouts. They were the best of all the armies. Being discovered was already shocking enough. Being chased away, although this deputy general played it down, the two of them could imagine what had happened. The scouts of the Zechen Legion were not weak. Both sides had definitely fought, and the result was that the Zechen Legion had lost few. Barlow came back to his senses and let out a long sigh. The Gray Coat Army cannot be underestimated. Under the same conditions, it is really difficult to destroy them. Gary was a little touched when he heard this. Just as he was about to nod, suddenly, the Gray Coat Army cannot be destroyed by the army alone. A slightly hoarse and magnetic voice traveled from outside the tent. At this moment, Ralph and the deputy general were stunned. It was as if they did not dare to believe it. The curtains moved slightly, and a purple figure walked in. Marshal Z. The few people in the tent cried out in shock. Then they stood up in a flurry and gave the most standard military salute. Don't make such a big fuss. Actually, I came with bad news. Yes, yesterday, the Northern Wilderness tribes officially attacked the border. If you like this work, you're welcome to come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 247. Z.E. This was a name that sounded somewhat feminine at first glance. Even her appearance and image were enough to make most women feel ashamed to death. If he was a normal person, he would probably become the private property of a perverted aristocrat. However, Z, who had the title of Marshal, was a character that the people of the brand worshipped. The barbarians of the Northern Wilderness trembled in fear. There was no need to say much about his praises. Perhaps it was because of the title of God of War that circulated among the people, or perhaps it was because of the Northern Wilderness tribe's highest military commander, Antoine, who said, "Whoever can give me Z's head, I will return him the capital of the brand." In the army, Z's reputation was even greater. Therefore, even the generals of the other two legions who secretly disliked the Zechen Legion had to salute him respectfully when they saw him. However, before Baylor and Gary could recover from the shock of seeing Z, they were stunned by the news he brought. The Northern Wilderness tribes have officially attacked the borders of the brand. The Northern Wilderness had been coveted by the brand for a long time. However, large-scale attacks were rarely seen in the past few years. Normally, they would only attack in small groups and leave immediately. Now that they were attacking in such a large scale, they must have gathered enough strength. The front line would definitely be filled with bloodshed for a long time. Great! Baylor slammed his palms together. His eyes were filled with passion. We can finally have a good battle. Gary's expression changed. That's right. Z nodded. We have to settle things here as soon as possible. Then, you guys can return to your respective legions. Okay. What about the Gray Coat Army? Z shook his head. There is no hope of turning the situation around. Let's retreat first. Ralph and the other two blushed when they heard this. They lowered their heads and apologized. This time, the Bran Empire invited them to encircle and annihilate the enemy with great confidence. However, not only did they fail, but they were also extorted by the enemy. How could the three generals not feel embarrassed? Waving his hand, Z said, "I heard about it on my way here. This matter doesn't have much to do with you. It was those students who acted on their own. It's good for them to experience this. I'm sure they'll be touched." Upon hearing this, Baylor and Gary heaved a sigh of relief. With Z's words, they wouldn't have to suffer any major reprimands when they returned. By the way, Marshal Z, why did you say that the Gray Coat Army can't be destroyed by the army alone? Baylor asked, puzzled. Cough, cough. Z cleared his throat and chuckled. The Gray Coat Army is a group that the Empire cannot avoid. Military tactics could only be used to eliminate what was in front of them, but they would continue to appear in the future. The only difference was that they had changed their names. If we want to eliminate them or temporarily weaken them, we can only use political tactics. However, this is impossible. Everyone was silent. It wasn't that Z's words were difficult to understand. It was that only someone at Z's level could speak frankly about this kind of topic. However, it wasn't appropriate for them to express such opinions in front of outsiders. It should be known that this was a comment on the entire aristocratic class in the empire. Gary shrugged and laughed self-deprecatingly. Let's not talk that far. We can't destroy the Gray Coat army in front of us. How embarrassing. Marshal Z, if you were here, what would you do? Disliking someone was a matter of the same level. Those who dared to criticize Z were at least the marshals of their respective armies. As generals, they wouldn't miss the opportunity to ask Z for advice. Me? Z raised his eyebrows and smiled. If I were here, it might take longer. The Gray Coat army's rations, armaments, and even soldiers came from the civilians. There were many villages along the way. The reason why the Gray Coat army could last for so long under your pursuit is also because of this. Therefore, if we want to destroy them temporarily, we have to first cut off their connection with the civilians. I will first send out scouts to relocate the main villages and implement the scorched earth strategy. The Gray Coat army soldiers won't be able to gain an advantage in a frontal battle, so they like to launch sneak attacks in small groups. For this kind of situation, conventional battle tactics won't be able to solve it. We have to disperse the troops into large groups and then fully delegate the authority. This way, we can increase the marching speed of the troops and also carry out targeted attacks. The individual combat ability of the Gray Coat army soldiers is no match for regular soldiers. That's right, we're not good at this kind of battle tactics. It will definitely be very chaotic when we command them. However, after attacking for a period of time, the Gray Coat army will also fall into chaos. They might even be more chaotic than us. After all, most of them are civilians and don't have a deep understanding of battle tactics. Therefore, in the end, in this kind of chaotic battle, we will rely on the strength of our soldiers to defeat them. The main tent fell into silence. Only the flickering of the candlelight could be heard, giving off a weak, crackling sound. Rel's expression was still, while Baylor and Gary's expressions were very complicated. After a long time, the three of them sighed softly and bowed to Z at the same time. Z didn't participate in the battle, but everything was as he had analyzed. In the previous pursuit, the Gray Coat army had used the strategy of launching sneak attacks in small groups. However, Baylor and the others didn't choose to split up. Instead, they gathered their troops together to pursue. Of course, this wasn't a problem of intelligence, but a difference in perception. They did this because they were used to the charge of an army. They didn't have this thought at all about splitting up their troops and fighting in a chaotic battle. After all, they were regular soldiers. Fighting in a chaotic battle like this was undoubtedly embarrassing. Z waved his hand. There's no need for that. This is just my imagination. We'll have to see the actual situation. Baylor and the others slowly shook their heads. No one doubted Z's battle tactics. They knew that he was just saying this to comfort them. Furthermore, they were generals who had led troops for many years. They naturally knew whether battle tactics were useful or not. Moments later, the group of old nobles also heard the news and hurried over. Although both sides weren't in the same system, and these old nobles had high positions, they didn't dare to be impudent in front of Z. They all greeted him first. After some pleasantries, Z first explained the current situation. Then, he looked at the negotiation list and gave some suggestions. The old nobles naturally accepted this. In fact, their negotiation with the Gray Coat army was only a dispute over the quantity of certain sensitive items. Now that Z had interfered and coincidentally encountered the northern wilderness, no one would say anything if they gave in slightly. The next morning, the old nobles invited Z to participate in the negotiation. However, the other party politely declined. He only said that he needed to organize his troops and rush back to the grand border fortress to prepare for war. This negotiation was without a doubt very smooth. This was because at the beginning, the old nobles took out the exchange list and firmly said that this was the final decision. When Losha and the others saw this, they were stunned. The two young men even began to worry that the old nobles in front of them had lost their minds and were planning to abandon the young nobles and start another war. However, when Losha and the others finished reading the exchange list, they were stunned. This was because the agreed provisions and cotton-padded clothes did not change. The most important thing was the military equipment. Although they still didn't reach the amount mentioned before, they all knew that this was already the best result. Losha and the others all had strange thoughts. Was there something wrong with the other party's head? At this time, the old nobles felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. This was the first time they had the absolute advantage. This was too damn difficult. No matter what, Losha and the others were satisfied with the outcome of the negotiation. After a slight test of the possibility of increasing the price, they were firmly rejected by the other party. They didn't continue to waste time on this. After that, both parties began to discuss the time and place of the exchange. After all, this amount of resources couldn't be transported in a short period of time. However, these were all minor details. Naturally, both parties wouldn't cause any trouble in this regard. Thus, after so many days of negotiation, this was the first time such a harmonious scene had occurred. At this time, in the southeast direction of the camp, a group of people were walking forward while talking and laughing. It was Z, Ralph, and some of the scouts who said that they were going to leave. That group of people defeated our scouts. Z asked, slightly surprised. Ralph nodded. The lieutenant added, according to the scouts yesterday, they were observing the other party's training. When they noticed, the other party was already a few meters behind them. After that, they tried to test the other party's strength. They were then captured by a burly man and a skinny young man. This statement was slightly different from what he said last night. The reason was, of course, because he couldn't bring himself to lose face. Z nodded thoughtfully. This is interesting. Ever since he accidentally heard the lieutenant's report last night, Z was interested in this group of gray coat army members. After knowing that they had training every day, he wanted to come and take a look. Marshal, that group of gray coat army members is not far ahead. A scout ran back quickly and saluted. Yes, let's go take a look. Z smiled and nodded. After walking for a short distance, they stopped in their tracks. There was a crisscrossing path in front of them. Dozens of people were scattered in it. It was obvious that they were divided into two groups. One group was in gray clothes, the other in black armor. There were more people in gray clothes, about 30 of them. The black armor group only had 7 or 8 people. Currently, the gray clothes were in a group of 5. They seemed to be searching for something. On the other hand, the black armor group was fighting alone. They were constantly avoiding the other party. Z and the others didn't have any cover. They just stood there and watched, so they were quickly seen by the 3 people opposite them. A burly man pointed at them and said something to the person in the middle. However, the person in the middle looked at him and waved his hand. He didn't say anything. This is a simulated battle. The deputy general looked at the situation and said, but the number of people is too unbalanced. Yes, are we late? Layer Fu shook his head. No. Although the black armor group was at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, their movements were very fast. After a few minutes, none of them were seen. They're observing. Z narrowed his eyes with interest. Yes, they're here. As soon as he said that, a black armor group began to counterattack. He snuck behind a group of people and quietly knocked out the last person. Then, he quickly retreated. The group in gray clothes didn't know anything. They only noticed the situation behind them after walking more than 10 meters away. Perhaps because they couldn't make a sound in this simulated battle, the remaining few people didn't hesitate and quickly rushed back. However, they were destined to miss because Z and the others had already seen that person come to another path. At this moment, he was staring at the last person in front of him as if the prelude to the attack was being kicked off. The scattered black armor group started to attack one after another. Corners, turns, blind spots. These people were very agile. Almost all of them chose the last person in each group to attack. The results were outstanding. These black armor group succeeded one by one without alerting the other party. One assassin's method, the deputy general commented. At this moment, the path was in chaos because of this sudden change. It could be seen that the teams in gray clothes were very careful. Every time they passed a turn, they would first test it out. However, this still didn't stop them from being knocked out. The black armor group had many methods to hide and deceive. Z and the others even saw a black armor group wearing gray clothes. They swaggered behind a group and knocked them out one by one. Amazing! Layer Fu's eyes flashed. He said with a slightly serious tone. Z nodded in agreement. The scout on the side twitched his mouth and finally said, "The black armor group's strength is obviously higher." Naturally, their attacks were successful. The deputy general shook his head. He turned around and said, "Other than the occasional attack, did you see any black armor group in gray clothes?" The scout was taken aback when he heard this. Then, his expression changed. At this moment, he noticed that although the black armor group attacked frequently in this small group of paths, they didn't meet the gray clothes group head-on. This meant that before they made their move, they had already calculated the routes of the surrounding gray coat teams in their minds and had already calculated their escape route. Of course, this wasn't easy to do, especially when they realized that the situation was not right. The gray clothes group sped up their search. The scout looked at the field again. When he saw the gray clothes group speeding up and changing directions because of the loss of teammates, he secretly took a deep breath. It was as if he felt the fear of not knowing where the enemy was, and the shadow of death was hanging over them at any time. After 10 minutes, the gray clothes group was completely wiped out. They didn't even see the face of any black armor group. At this time, the gray clothes group that was knocked out woke up. Then, the roles of the two groups were switched. This time, the black armor group was responsible for searching, while the gray clothes group was responsible for the sneak attack. The result didn't change much. Everyone in the black armor group had a clear role: observe, attack, plan, retreat. The gray clothes group was found and captured one by one. The sneak attack group didn't even make a move. They were seen through and fell into a trap. Z, who had been watching silently, let out a long breath. His face was a little shocked at first. Then he became excited. Layer Fu, do you still remember my idea? Without waiting for the other party to answer, Z continued, "A long time ago, I've been thinking about whether there are too many loopholes in our command during the battle. Is it possible to form a group of elite soldiers? They don't have a lot of people, but they all have outstanding talents in various aspects. At the crucial moment, they can destroy the enemy's command system. But after I tried, I realized that it was very difficult. Maybe they're all very strong and talented, but they can't be put together. In the end, their combat power is even worse than normal elite soldiers." Then Z pointed to the front. "But now I think I can see the embryonic form of this." Layer Fu and the deputy general looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with shock. Of course, they knew about the plan that the marshal had many years ago. However, it didn't succeed. Later on, it improved many of the flaws in the command system. This improved the combat power of the Zichan Legion to another level. They originally thought that the marshal was the only one in the world who had this idea. They didn't expect to meet another one here. Moreover, this person was one step further than a marshal. "I'm really looking forward to it." Z looked at the battle that was coming to an end and sighed. Then, he glanced at the three people who seemed to be the leaders. He could not help but cry out in surprise when she saw this. "What's wrong, Marshal?" "Oh, nothing. I met an acquaintance." Z's expression returned to normal. He looked at the person in the middle and smiled. "So it's you. With your brain, it's not surprising that you could come up with this idea. Let's go." Z, turn around. "I hope that the next time I see them, I'll see a mature elite team. As for now, let's take care of those uninvited guests from the north." "Boss, they left." "Yes." Tang raised his head and looked at the opposite side. He raised his eyebrows and squinted his eyes. Strange, why did he feel like he had seen that purple figure somewhere before? Boss, those idiotic rookies lost again. David looked at the dejected gray coat squad and sneered. Oh, Tang In stopped thinking and shook his head. Be patient. You guys started off like this. Then why did you scold them so harshly just now? Please, I'm the boss. Of course I have to put on some airs. Besides, this is also a chance for you guys to play the good guy and establish your authority. Yes, tell those losers that I don't want to see them. Tell them to run 20 kilometers with weights first. The last one will get nothing to eat. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.